Inside, we've also got the arrival of various members, I think, of cabinet ministers' families. We can see a few of them there. It's difficult to identify people, of course, right now with their masks on, but this is a somewhat, irrespective of the masks, regular scene or normal scene for a cabinet shuffle. What happens in there is members of the ministers affected, their families are invited to witness this. There's a lot fewer chairs than we are used to seeing in that room, but they're invited to witness the swearing-in ceremony. And then following that, we are anticipating in about an hour and a half, the Prime Minister, along with those ministers, will address reporters, and we'll carry that live for you as well. I want to go over for you with my colleagues a little bit about what we can expect inside that room any moment now. And to do that, I'm joined by the CBC's David Cochrane, Chris Hall, and Rob Russo. David, I'm going to start with you because you've been working your sources all day to get some information on what we can expect, and you were the one who confirmed for us that Chrystia Freeland becomes the new finance minister. What else can we anticipate inside that room?
Yeah, so after a day of controversy yesterday with the abrupt resignation of Bill Morneau as finance minister, Chrystia Freeland will make history today as the first woman to hold that job at the federal level. There have been provincial finance ministers who are women, but this is the first federal finance minister of Canada who's a woman. She's going to keep her deputy prime minister's post, but she's going to give up the intergovernmental affairs role that she's also held since this cabinet shuffle post-election, and that is going to go to Dominic LeBlanc. His current job is the president of the Queen's Privy Council. He took really on a reduced role that required less travel because of his health complications. He's recovering from treatment for cancer, and it was always suggested that he would take on expanded duties once his health recovered. The last time we saw him, the post-election swearing in, he had hair like me, and he was wearing a mask because the treatment causes hair to fall out. Well, we've now seen on social media his hair has grown back. He'll probably still be wearing a mask because this is a pandemic after all, Vashi, but LeBlanc will move into that role. The real story, though, is Freeland. That whenever there is a crisis that this country and this government is facing, the Prime Minister turns to her. When NAFTA became an issue because of President Trump, he shuffled his cabinet to make Chrystia Freeland the minister responsible for that. When it looked like after the election, anger and alienation at the provincial level was going to be the big issue and unrest domestically, he made Freeland the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister and the Deputy Premier to rebuild relationships with the provinces. And now that they're charting an economic recovery out of a pandemic, he's turning to Chrystia Freeland once again.
Chris, let me bring you here in on that point on Chrystia Freeland as the pick for finance minister. How significant a selection is it, and what do you read into it?
Well, a couple of things. To back up what David said, of course, she is the person that Justin Trudeau most trusts when it comes to difficult files, whether it was trying to negotiate a new trade deal with the United States or whether it is dealing with the provinces, both prior to COVID, but as a chairman of the COVID-19 Cabinet Committee. So a signal, I think, here is that he is going to someone who will think like-minded with him, who has the same priorities and who can execute, and has proven she can execute in whatever portfolio she's been handed. The other part of it, I think, is that we need to talk about her in conjunction with Dominic LeBlanc, because it does show the Prime Minister is increasingly relying on a very small circle of people around him. Mm-hmm. Part of the issue with Bill Morneau when he resigned was concern that perhaps he didn't agree with the focus the government had on how they would spend post-pandemic when the economy began to recover. So I'm watching what will she have to say today, if anything, and what the Prime Minister will have to say about why he tapped her. And as we look ahead, we do expect that there will be a cabinet retreat in the middle of September. Potentially, we will have Parliament reset to put a new agenda forward, recognizing that both the campaign platform and the mandate letters given to cabinet ministers last fall are no longer valid. And then finally, will there be an economic update or a budget, some significant financial statement that will set out the plans the government has for the next 2 and 3 years?
Let's talk a bit about that, Rob, and I'll just pause for a second. We were looking at shots inside Rideau Hall, and I can't help but notice how different it really does look compared to every other ceremony I've watched, every other swearing-in ceremony. It's a tighter shot right now, but before they were showing a wide shot of the room, very, very sparsely filled, not a lot of people there at all. So this will definitely be, I think, something different than certainly we've seen in that room before. On the subject, Rob, because you and Chris have been reporting all day about what we can anticipate when it comes to how the government intends to use today as an opportunity to kind of turn the page. Right. What should our viewers know?
Well, let's say mini shuffle, maximum impact is what they're hoping for, and that impact, they hope, will trigger the pandemic pivot. Pivot away from scandal, if you're a hopeful Liberal, and towards the beginning of laying out a platform for the Liberal Party heading into an election that could come as soon as next spring. What they want to do, and what they have been doing quietly, is coming up with potential economic options, things that they could put in front of Canadians as a result of these changes, as a result of new priorities. One of the things we've learned during the pandemic is that Canada has done a very bad job looking after its older people who are in long-term care centres. Is there a role for the federal government to play there, which in a provincial responsibility, that would make it less likely that something like that could happen again? The other thing that we've learned during this pandemic is that if you really do want women to join the workforce, increase economic activity, you're going to have to do a better job of looking after children. Is there a role again there for the federal government in what is an area of provincial jurisdiction? So what we're talking about is classic old liberalism, national cost-shared programs. Is there an opportunity to do that while you're spending money? And that would probably take a budget that perhaps the government could fall on, but there are lots of Liberals who think that would be a good platform to run on. The other thing I want to say about Chrystia Freeland is that from the moment she came in, the people around Justin Trudeau thought that she incarnated the neoliberalism of what they believe a 21st century liberal should be like. Those people also believe that Justin Trudeau is that person. In some ways, I wonder if we're seeing the beginning of the benighting of Chrystia Freeland as his unofficial preferred candidate to succeed him at some point. She's done everything else. What is there left for her to do? Yeah,
certainly that's what I know a lot of Liberals have been discussing, for months, or at least in a more detailed way, I would say, since the WE controversy broke. There's a lot of speculation, and this just, I would argue, adds to it about what her future looks like in the Liberal Party. Just on the subject, though, of what Rob and Chris touched on, David, about prorogation and what else we can anticipate beyond the cabinet shuffle. Look, this has been sort of a firecracker for opposition parties in the past. What are you anticipating the reaction is like today?
Well, the big question is how do they prorogue, right? Like they want to do a new throne speech to restart their agenda, and revamping the cabinet today, they want to reset the agenda as well. So the question is, do you prorogue it today and shut Parliament down until October? Well, the net outcome of that is that the parliamentary committees cease to function. The parliamentary committees, I believe there are 4 of them that are investigating the WE controversy, which played no small role in bringing us to today. Something we're expecting this week, a massive dump of documents to the Finance Committee, thousands of pages of documents of the correspondence between departments, including Bill Morneau's department, former Department of Finance, about the origins of this Canada Student Grants Program that went to the WE charity. So, are they proroguing today and shutting down the committees and stopping the release of that? Or will they take steps to allow the committees to function, to allow the documents to come out? I mean, proroguing is a normal thing. It became a real flashpoint during the minority crisis when Stephen Harper did it to kind of save his government. The substance of what they do today will really matter, because if it shuts down the inquiry into WE, it's going to be a massive scandal. If it allows it to continue, it could just be the technical thing they have to do to press the reset button on a throne speech.
If you're just joining us now,
Banshee,
I'm going to get you in 1 second, Chris. I just want to make sure our viewers know what they're looking at. We're looking at the room inside Rideau Hall, where any minute now we're anticipating a cabinet shuffle, the swearing-in ceremony. I just want to make sure that you're aware. We're going to take that to you live when it begins to happen. Sorry, Chris, you wanted to jump in on David's point.
Yeah, just very quickly, he did mention the 2008 and 2010 use of prorogation by Stephen Harper to avoid defeat, but also to shut down a committee that was looking at the Afghan detainees question. They didn't pay a penalty either time. They were reelected both times. So there is a risk here, obviously, if they prorogue today and set off until October. But they could also wait until later in the year, like September, when they're supposed to come back and say, look, we're going to prorogue for a day or two. It has the same effect of resetting committees, but it doesn't cut them off when there is still a number of hearing dates set.
Yeah, I think it really will depend, and the reaction will depend. And I should probably explain, prorogation essentially means shutting stuff down until you open it again here on Parliament Hill. And Rob, it really does depend on the way in which it's used, as both David and Chris point out. If it looks like, or it's perceived that this is being used to shut down the investigations into their actions in the WE charity controversy, there'll be a certain reaction to it. If it's just a brief reset, there might be a different reaction.
That's right. I mean, there have been prorogations that have lasted just a day or two in Canada's history. And nobody said exactly when prorogation is going to happen. The Public Service has been asked to prepare for prorogation scenarios, as they have been asked to prepare for budget scenarios. But that could come in all likelihood after the cabinet meets. And when the cabinet meets, there is a plan for them to meet for the first time face-to-face. They haven't all met face-to-face in a long, long time. It's been virtual, but there is a room off Sussex Drive, not far from where the Prime Minister and the Governor General reside normally, that will allow the entire cabinet to meet in a socially distanced forum. We were talking about how unprecedented or extraordinary a time we're in. That's the kind of thing they have to plan for now. If they are going to meet face-to-face in a larger forum for the first time, they're going to have to find a room that allows them to do that. The other thing I'm looking at now as I look at the picture of Rita Hall, I'm wondering if Governor General Julie Payette is going to be there today. She does not have to be there, but the Chief Justice could do this, or another Justice of the Supreme Court. We all know, because of the extraordinary work that our Ashley Burke and Kristen Everson have been doing here in our Bureau, that there is controversy swirling around the Governor General. So we'll be watching to see if she's there and what the body language is like between the Prime Minister and the Governor General.
Yeah, we'll be watching intently, and I should say, because this would be the first time that we've seen her publicly, correct me if I'm wrong, or any interaction between her and the Prime Minister. And it's a very separate issue from what we're discussing today, but it does definitely add to the drama. There's been a lot of, I listened to, for example, some of the opposition press conferences today, and there were tons of questions on the shuffle. There were also questions, though, based on Ashley's reporting about, his judgment or the process by which this has all gone down, or that the Governor General was selected, and if there needs to be changes. So I feel like that's almost like a second level of drama today.
Vashi, it's not all that separate, because he has to ask the Governor General to prorogue. We have a wounded Prime Minister asking somebody who is under attack whether or not he can prorogue Parliament. We've seen in the past a wounded Prime Minister go and ask a Governor General for that prorogation, only to have the Governor General keep him waiting, cooling his heels far longer than he expected, while she deliberated long and hard about that decision. And I'm talking about Stephen Harper and Michaëlle Jean in 2008.
I'm just looking really quickly, I'll get over to David in a second, at the room inside right now, where we are anticipating the ceremony to begin any moment. I did see Ian Shugart, the clerk of the Privy Council. He also testified before the same committee, of course, that the Finance Minister did, the Finance Committee, so he would be a fairly familiar face. He's kind of the top bureaucrat. He's present there. I have yet to see David, I don't know if you've seen her, but Julie Payette.
No, and I'm trying to find out if she is in fact there. But what's interesting about her being there is that she is kind of symbolic of the questions about the Prime Minister's judgment that have interwoven throughout the WE controversy, the SNC-Lavalin controversy. The way the government keeps getting itself into trouble by rushing things and maybe having a little bit of a blind spot. She's kind of a human embodiment of that too. And normally, Vashi, we're allowed to get pictures of all the people arriving. That looks like Madame Payette right there.
I see Chrystia.
No, that's Chrystia Freeland.
It's Chrystia Freeland right there at the front. I see Dominic LeBlanc expected to take over the intergovernmental affairs portfolio next to Ms. Freeland. There is the Prime Minister walking in, and I think that's Julie Payette. Yeah, that is the Governor General, I believe.
I saw the Prime Minister's wife.
Well.
This is the problem when we have tiny monitors in our studio.
And masks. I apologize.
And masks. Yeah, everyone's
squinting.
a bandit.
Let's take a listen in for a moment.
Le greffier du Conseil privé demandera maintenant à la gouverneure générale la permission de procéder.
Excellence, nous allons commencer. Your Excellency, may we begin.
With the Governor General's approval, we will now proceed with the ceremony. Maintenant que la gouverneure générale a signifié son approbation, nous procéderons à la cérémonie. The ministers who are assuming additional responsibilities will please come forward to take the oath of office. Les ministres qui assument des responsabilités supplémentaires sont priés de s'avancer pour prêter le serment d'office. The Honourable Chrystia Freeland, Minister of Finance, to be styled Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. L'Honorable Chrystia Freeland, Ministre des Finances, devant porter le titre de Vice-Première ministre et Ministre des Finances.
I, Chrystia Freeland, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. So help me God. Moi, Chrystia Freeland,
do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. So help me God.
You're looking inside Rideau Hall right now. That's Chrystia Freeland signing, making it official. She is now not only the Deputy Prime Minister of this country, but the Minister of Finance as well. You saw there she is getting a round of applause from the socially distanced crowd who have amassed, including some members of her family. A very different type of ceremony in that you saw no hugs between the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, but some elbow bumps. Let's listen in as Dominic LeBlanc changes his portfolio.
Le président du Conseil privé de la Reine pour le Canada et ministre des Affaires intergouvernementales, the Honourable Dominic LeBlanc, President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada, to be styled President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs.
Moi, Dominic LeBlanc, je promets
Dominic LeBlanc, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. So help me God.
I, Dominic LeBlanc, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. So help me God.
That is the newly minted Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Dominic LeBlanc, giving a little bit of an elbow bump to both the Prime Minister and the Governor General. He'll sign the book ahead of him there and make it official as well, just like Chrystia Freeland did before him. You're looking inside Rideau Hall at the swearing-in ceremony for two cabinet ministers who take on different and/or additional portfolios. Chrystia Freeland adds to her position as Deputy Prime Minister the role of Minister of Finance, and she hands over to Dominic LeBlanc the portfolio of Intergovernmental Affairs, which is a fancy way of saying he will now manage the relationship between the federal government and the provinces.
Général apposera sa signature sur le registre des serments.
And here we see Governor General Julie Payette playing her role in this ceremony. Of course, the Governor General has been under intense scrutiny following a series of reports from my colleagues Ashley Burke and Kristen Everson around things ranging from her relationship with to the RCMP, her security detail, as well as costs that her office have incurred for additional privacy measures and a whole host of other behaviors towards employees. So a very interesting setting for all of this here at Rideau Hall. She plays a big part in a ceremony like this and has in
The
in
Prime
past
Minister
cabinet shuffles.
will now sign the oath book. Le Premier ministre apposera maintenant sa signature sur le registre des serments.
And here is the Prime Minister doing his part to make this transition official. Of course, it comes on the heels of a controversial number of weeks involving now officially former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Yesterday, Mr. Morneau told the Prime Minister, according to Mr. Morneau, that he was resigning to pursue another opportunity, that he didn't feel he was the appropriate person for the job anymore. And very shortly thereafter, the Prime Minister's office has now
The
announced,
clerk of the
course,
Privy Council will now sign the oath book. Le greffier du Conseil privé apposera maintenant sa signature sur le registre des serments.
As the ceremony continues, I want to let you know that we are anticipating that the Prime Minister, along with Minister Freeland and Minister LeBlanc, will make comments to the media. They'll take questions from reporters in about an hour's time from Parliament Hill. Lots of questions for the Prime Minister around this cabinet shuffle and really what preceded it. Lots of speculation about what exactly led to Mr. Morneau's resignation, though Mr. Morneau presented his reasons to reporters last evening. Like I said, a lot of speculation about
Ladies and gentlemen,
other
to
contributing
conclude the
factors.
ceremony, please join me in congratulating the members of the 29th Canadian Ministry. Mesdames et messieurs, pour terminer la cérémonie, applaudissons les membres du 29e Conseil des ministres. Thank you for being here at Rideau Hall today. May I ask that you please rise for the departure of the Governor-General, the Prime Minister, and the members of the Ministry. Merci de votre présence ici à Rideau Hall aujourd'hui. Veuillez vous lever pour le départ de la Gouverneure générale, du Premier ministre, ainsi que des membres du Conseil des ministres. Merci.
And that concludes a brief but very significant cabinet shuffle here in the nation's capital. Leaving the building there, behind the Governor-General, Julie Payette, is the Prime Minister alongside his wife, Sophie Gregoire-Trudeau, the new Minister of Finance, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, and then finally Dominic LeBlanc, the new Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, followed by some members of both of their families. A sparsely attended ceremony, more sparsely attended than you would anticipate, but not in these circumstances. Of course, you saw the masks and the elbow bumps. This was a cabinet shuffle in the era of a pandemic, and you could certainly see the visual representation of that. Standing alongside me, watching that all unfold, are my colleagues, David Cochran, Chris Hall, and Rob Russo. David, I'll start with you. No big surprises there. You had confirmed all of this for a number of hours, but certainly a sight to see.
Yeah, it was a very sterile and surreal kind of cabinet swearing in. Normally, this is a day of big crowds, big smiles, big hugs, big handshakes. And there were no obvious smiles because they're all behind the masks and very sparsely attended, some elbow bumps and no real obvious signs of joy, which is perhaps appropriate considering the circumstances under which all of this is happening, right? The real big day of controversy yesterday with the abrupt departure of Bill Morneau and now scrambling to sort of revamp the cabinet and rebuild it. The big questions we still have are unanswered. We know the finance minister is, we know who's taking the intergovernmental affairs job. What exactly does the prorogation of Parliament mean, and what does that do to the WE ethics investigation and the WE controversy and the release of all of those documents that I know opposition parliamentarians in particular are counting on getting as soon as possible? We keep asking, we keep getting told that the Prime Minister will make all of this clear at 3:30 when he speaks at West Block, and nobody wants to scoop or preempt him in terms of what he's going to say. So the details of the prorogation plan and what that does to the ethics investigation, we'll have that in an hour, and that may very well be the most important bit of news we get today.
Well, our audience will have that in an hour, too, because we're going to carry the full press conference with the Prime Minister and whomever joins him, including Minister Freeland or Minister LeBlanc, as soon as that happens in an hour's time. Chris, you've seen a number of swearing-ins throughout your career. What stuck out for you in this one?
Well, a couple of things. Obviously, the size of it. I saw the Chief of Staff to Chrystia Freeland, Jeremy Broadhurst in the background, and I think that's kind of the limit of what they put on for membership in this, or for invitations to this. Looking ahead, a couple of things that I think are really important to weigh. One is, will Chrystia Freeland prove to be someone who is in lockstep completely with the Prime Minister when it comes to laying out a financial plan for recovery and the priorities that he would like to see, this transformative change that we've heard so much about, investing in areas like childcare and in long-term facilities. And then intergovernmental affairs. Chrystia Freeland was not, if not popular, she was certainly respected. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, for example, talked about his real joy of working with her and the fairness that she brought to the table. Dominic LeBlanc has been in this position before, maybe a bit more hard-nosed. He's a longtime childhood friend of the Prime Minister, would also have his ear. Interesting to see what kind of role he adopts for himself as the government federally here continues to try to work with the provinces to address particularly the healthcare problems that were exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, it's a great point about intergovernmental affairs and the relationship with the provinces. I listened to Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, as you referenced, Chris, his press conference not too long ago, and he was asked about Freeland's appointment to this role, and he had, like, you would think there's no bigger fan of Chrystia Freeland than Doug Ford. He had nothing bad to say. I think he said at one point there's no better person for the role. He also wants some money for a number of transit programs, as he pointed out. But it certainly echoed things that he has said throughout the pandemic. And she had smoothed over some particularly tough bridges to smooth over, or tough gaps to smooth over with some premiers. I'm thinking, for example, of Jason Kenney over in Alberta and Doug Ford in Ontario following a very tumultuous election. So it will be interesting to see, I think you're right, how Dominic LeBlanc handles all of this. Rob, when you look at the sort of first two people that the Prime Minister selected to try and turn the page on what's happened with the Finance Minister and everything that preceded it, when you look at Dominic LeBlanc and Chrystia Freeland, what about that sticks out to you? What should we know about their relationship to this Prime Minister?
Well, I would imagine that they will be called upon to be the challenge function that has been missing, it seems, during the WE scandal. People that the Prime Minister can turn to and say, okay, pay me the compliment of being blunt. What have I done wrong here? What am I about to do wrong? Tell me. I'm listening. Those are very important functions to exercise, very important in a cabinet system. Hasn't always been there in the last cabinet. I was struck by one other thing. We talked about Dominic LeBlanc's challenge. Absolutely true. Even public servants around those premiers are surprised and actually quite delighted at the federal government's response to provincial needs in the form of Chrystia Freeland. That'll be a tough act to follow. But Chrystia Freeland also has a challenge, not just a fiscal and economic challenge. We'll get to that in a second. But she has a challenge inside of her own government. Part of the criticism leveled at Bill Morneau was that he was not exactly a bridge builder when it came to caucus. I'm not sure that the same accusation can't be leveled against Madam Freeland. There are people who would have liked to have had more access to her and didn't feel like they got enough in the caucus room. I think that that's an area where people will be watching. And if she does have ambitions beyond being the Minister of Everything, she's going to have to work on that. The last thing that I was struck by today is that this is not the way these people anticipated they would be coming back to work after vacation. The Prime Minister had taken a couple of weeks off. You know, the first day you get back, you want to go through your email and set priorities. He came back and he had his Finance Minister resign. We shouldn't forget that this moment of protocol and minimal pageantry was born out of a political crisis, in the middle of an economic crisis, in the middle of a health crisis. This is not over. They have a lot of very, very difficult days ahead of them.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to underscore, David, that this was very ceremonial and it was interesting to look at given it's in the middle of a pandemic. But when you talked about it being sort of sterile and a little bit different in its feeling, it reminded me of the difference between the cabinet shuffles that occurred during SNC versus other ones, right? Where it's
the
like
weekly cabinet
these are not necessarily by choice. They're kind of forced upon in a way, whether by his own doing or otherwise, the Prime Minister. And there is that feeling to them. There was also stuff at play here, clearly, that led to this event.
Yeah, I mean, he came back his first day back to school, and his finance minister said, "I'm leaving and I'm going somewhere else," and he quit, and then forced these changes. And anyway, and also on a positive note, it's good to see Dominic LeBlanc back and looking healthy, considering everything he went through in the run-up to this on a very human level. The interesting thing now is, you talked about Doug Ford, who appears to have like a picture of Chrystia Freeland in his locker. There's that kind of an affection and relationship building there. She has been a big part of the First Minister's table with the almost weekly calls that the Prime Minister has had with the premiers. She's now going to move to the Finance Minister's table, where they have also semi-regular calls. That is going to be interesting because she's still going to be a big part of the rebuilding of the relationship with the provinces, which she has done a very good job of. Now she has a bag of money when she sits down with them. She is the person who controls the purse strings for the transit project that Doug Ford wants, for the support for the offshore oil sector that Premier-designate Andrew Furey in Newfoundland and Labrador is looking for. And also Dominic LeBlanc is someone who works well with, on a basic political level. He is probably one of the best, handshaking or elbow bumping as it is now, sort of networking political operatives in the cabinet. So that's an important thing to have in terms of smoothing over relations and having good political conversations at the federal provincial table, because one of the successes of the pandemic response has been the lack of federal provincial partisanship. It's been set aside, they've been able to work together. It has not been perfect, but that sort of infighting that could have really derailed it wasn't part of it. And, jumping back to Rob's point about Freeland maybe not necessarily being super accessible to the caucus. It's a very legitimate point. The difference I will point out between her and Bill Morneau is she also hasn't been a problem for the government at times. There's been no controversy around her, no ethics violations around Chrystia Freeland. She handled Trump, she handled Ford and Kenny and Moe, and now she's being asked to handle the COVID economy. So she may not be touchy-feely and always accessible, but she does carry the veneer of competence with a track record of success that gives the caucus some comfort in her.
It's an interesting point, though, Chris, that David Hurley touched on last evening as well, insofar as the might, or perhaps the increased might of caucus throughout, as compared to, I guess, in the last mandate, where they still did exercise some might, but especially in a minority situation as the government finds itself in right now, or the Liberals find themselves in right now, that there is that pressure that Bill Morneau faced, and perhaps Minister Freeland will face as well, to soothe things over, to make that extra effort with caucus.
Yeah, just remember that the finance minister, only an hour or so before he appeared before the finance committee on the WE issue, informed the prime minister that he'd had to cut a check for $41,000 that he had not paid in terms of expenses for traveling on WE-sponsored trips. He never told members of the committee, the Liberal members of the committee. They first heard about it in his opening statement, and that just sort of cemented the idea he never was a regular attendee at caucus, and that people felt like he was removed from them. The flip side for Chrystia Freeland, she is a very effective communicator. The other big knock against Bill Morneau is that he wasn't really very political. He wasn't good at giving non-scripted answers to questions during interviews. So these are important matters to take into account. So we'll see. Chrystia Freeland has political capital. She now has political money to spend. She will be able to make decisions, I think, in a way that doesn't require the kind of running it past the Prime Minister's staff in the way that we have seen so many other ministers have to do. And we've heard so many complaints behind the scenes about the kind of control that the center, the Prime Minister's office, has executed over the various ministries.
Rob, final point before I take a quick commercial break, or final question to you. If a lot of this is about turning the page, or attempting to turn the page on all the controversy that ultimately led to what happened less than 24 hours ago with the resignation of the Prime Minister, how far do you think this goes?
Not very far. As David said earlier, we've got a document dump coming this week. Unless there's prorogation, those committees are going to keep working. The Ethics Commissioner is going to be doing his job and submitting reports. The Prime Minister and the outgoing Finance Minister, Mr. Morneau, have essentially admitted that they broke the ethics law. So this won't go away. What we don't know, what we cannot assess now, is whether or not the stench of that fills the nostrils of voters to the point that they want to reject the Liberal Party. That's for the future to determine, but no, it's not going to go away anytime soon.
You all have such a way with words. I didn't think I'd be talking about nostrils, but I think I actually misspoke. My control room is telling me that I said the resignation of the Prime Minister, not Finance Minister. Whoops, I meant Finance Minister.
You made Pierre Poilievre perk up.
My apologies, yeah. I am going to take a quick commercial break, but we've got a lot more reaction to this cabinet shuffle coming up. And we also are standing by to take you live to a press conference from the Prime Minister in less than an hour's time from here on Parliament Hill. I'm Vashi Kapelos. We're back in just 2 minutes here on this extended edition of Power and Politics.
Chrystia Freeland, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. So help me God.
I, Dominic LeBlanc, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. So help me God.
Welcome back to Power and Politics. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Don't adjust your clocks. You're watching a special edition of our show because it's a pretty significant day here in Ottawa and on Parliament Hill. And in fact, in that building, Rideau Hall, just moments ago, as you're looking at on your screens, Dominic LeBlanc and Chrystia Freeland both took on new portfolios. That's the swearing-in ceremony that you were just taking a look at. All of this on the heels of the resignation of Bill Morneau last evening at about 7 o'clock Eastern. He announced, and we brought that to you live, lots of reaction trickling in ever since, and many consequences, as you see there, through this cabinet shuffle. We're standing by to bring you live as well in less than an hour to a press conference the Prime Minister is holding on Parliament Hill as well. We'll bring that to you as soon as it happens. In the meantime, let's get some reaction, more reaction to the cabinet shuffle as well as Bill Morneau's resignation. I've got our Tuesday Power Panel standing by for that. Shakir Chambers, he's a senior consultant at Navigator, joining us from Toronto. Political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin is with us across the river in Gatineau. And joining us for his Power Panel debut, Elliot Hughes is a former policy director for Bill Morneau at Finance, now senior advisor at Summa Strategies. Hi, everyone. Great to see you.
Great to see you.
Elliot, I'm going to start with you because you spent time obviously working with the man at the center of all this, Bill Morneau.
Right.
How surprised were you, or were you at all surprised by the resignation yesterday?
Look, I mean, the news trickling out over the last couple of weeks weren't great for Bill. So I suppose it wasn't too big a surprise. However, how it all unfolded and then what's happened and transpired since then, I suppose you can say has been something. But you know, I did work with him for a couple of years, and Bill was a great guy, great to work for, strategic thinker. I think he gave up a lot. His family gave up a lot for him to work in government and in politics. It's not an easy game, but he got into this to help Canadians. He did that with some big pieces and was successful that way. But I think we can all agree that Bill was never really one that who loved politics that much and sort of put up with it in a way to be able to get some of the big stuff done that he did. But yeah, obviously a big couple of days, and with Chrystia Freeland coming in as well, a historic day really, with the first female finance minister in the post. So interesting couple of days, and I'm sure there would be more to follow at 3:30 with the Prime Minister's press conference.
I want to get reaction from Françoise and Shakira, of course, to the selection of Minister Freeland in just a moment. I just wanted to quickly ask you a follow-up around the reporting over the last week and a half. When you were there working for Minister Morneau, did you have a sense that there were these big policy rifts or gaps between the Prime Minister and him on issues like the size of the deficit?
Rifts is maybe overstating it. I think the relationship between a finance minister and a prime minister, it can always involve healthy tension and a back and forth and disagreements. Bill came from a business background, was obviously a little bit more fiscally conservative than perhaps the prime minister and other members of the cabinet that came in 2015. So there was naturally going to be some back and forth on the deficit spending and so on. But I think if you look back and you see what he accomplished and what he was willing to do, and the CCB, the CPP, all sorts of big projects, I never thought that it was something that he was very unaligned with the Prime Minister on. I think generally speaking, they ended up in the same place.
Shakir, your thoughts on what we were just showing off the top of the segment, Chrystia Freeland swearing in. She's now not only the Deputy Prime Minister, but also the Minister of Finance, and then hands over the portfolio where it concerns intergovernmental affairs to Dominic LeBlanc. What do you think of the selection and the changes there?
I think in terms of Minister Freeland, I think she's been probably the most effective, if not the only effective minister in Trudeau's government. I think ultimately, listen, I can play politics here, but it's a good choice. She's handled some of the toughest files, whether it's dealing with Trump in the U.S., whether it's dealing with the provinces. I mean, if you would have told me following the last election that we would put Chrystia Freeland in the intergovernment relations profile, and premiers like Doug Ford, Kenny, Scott Moe would all be praising and saying she's very effective, she's very reasonable, I would just laugh at that statement. So I think she's done a fantastic job. I think now that she's been at the front and center as far as dealing with the premiers, now she actually has the tools, right, to actually provide them with the spending, provide them with the support that they need. So ultimately, I think this bodes well for Trudeau as far as trying to reset. We'll see how it all plays out. But end of the day, Minister Freeland has been Miss Fix-It for this government. So Prime Minister Trudeau is betting that she'll fix this problem as well as far as the economic recovery coming out of the COVID pandemic.
On that question, Françoise, of a reset, I was asking my colleague Rob Russo the same question a few minutes ago, but I'm wondering what your take or your perspective is on it. How do you feel like today and these announcements, these shifts, these changes, how might that inform or affect a potential reset?
I'm not so sure if I would qualify this as a reset. I had two words that came to mind when I heard about Chrystia Freeland and Dominic LeBlanc, which was loyalty and congeniality. Prime Minister Trudeau went to his two most loyal people on his front bench. And at the same time, I have to wonder what type of depth that front bench has, because when for any job, you have to go to either Dominic LeBlanc, who just battled the biggest thing in his life. And I'm so glad. That was one of my best moments, was to see Dom LeBlanc at the Governor General today, although I'm very happy that a woman becomes first Minister of Finance for the federal government. But on a personal note, this is such a good guy, but he's also a very trustworthy person to the Prime Minister. And I think for Prime Minister Trudeau, I'm not so sure that it's about reset. I think it's about everything that's been unfolding in the last few weeks. Let's not kid ourselves. I know Elliot worked with Bill Morneau, but outside the air, I would ask him, did you believe every word the ex-minister of finance was giving for stepping down? I mean, I'm sure if the we situation hadn't happened, we would not be there. I don't believe in those rifts. I think there's people who were playing games in that aspect. So that's why I think Prime Minister Trudeau needed two really safe people to go to continue in this ship that is, there's a lot of waves. And now for the reset, I think they're not yet there. I think they will have to think about it because there's so many options open in different directions, second wave, deficit. Good luck to Chrystia Freeland, honestly, because all her other files are chump change compared to what lies ahead of her. And I do hope she's up for the task.
Yeah, I guess my guess is that there'll be a lot of questions on some of the things that you touched on, especially where the reasoning behind the resignation of Bill Morneau is concerned. For the Prime Minister, we have yet to hear from him on how that all went down. Mr. Morneau was pretty specific last night in saying that he was not asked to resign, that he went in and told the Prime Minister that he was going to resign. But what preceded that, not just with we, but all that reporting around these policy cleavages and things along that line, certainly lead some people to the conclusion that might not be the whole story, or at least, you know, I guess the whole story is the right way to put it. Elliot, you obviously have a lot of experience in the department itself. When you see the selection of Chrystia Freeland, what are you thinking of?
I think she's well set up to do really well in this, to do a great job as finance minister. We've seen it time and time again, her rise to the occasion, whether it was dealing with Donald Trump, President Trump, whether it was dealing with conservative premiers, even some international trade agreements before, she had to deal with NAFTA. She has succeeded every time. And those skills and that experience that she's picked up are going to serve her extremely well. You become the negotiator in chief, essentially, when you're the finance minister. You're that point person. You've got the purse strings. You're the one who decides who's going to get the money. And there's obviously a big need for money right now. And she's very aligned with the Prime Minister. They're simpatico in their thinking. I do think that she will want to establish herself and her own policy and her own push on certain directions. So that'll be something to watch, to see how she does differentiate herself from the Prime Minister in the coming weeks and months. But she's extremely well positioned to succeed in that role. And while it's a tall task at any time, and particularly in a pandemic, I think she's going to. She has all the skills and experience necessary to succeed.
In about just under 45 minutes time, we're anticipating we will hear from the Prime Minister. I think we have a shot of the podium being set up right now, or it's already set up on Parliament Hill. That's where we are anticipating at 3:30 Eastern, the Prime Minister, and perhaps alongside Minister Freeland and Minister LeBlanc, they will take questions from reporters about the resignation of Bill Morneau and, of course, the subsequent cabinet shuffle. Shakir, I wanted to ask you about the other thing we're expecting to hear about from the Prime Minister, and that's the possibility of prorogation and a sort of official reset, I guess. Lots of questions right now about how long that might be, and that, I think, would really determine how the opposition reacts to it, right? Is this going to be a shutdown basically until October, or will it be a couple of days allowing for a reset? What are you hearing from your colleagues about that, and what do you anticipate the opposition's reaction is going to be like?
Well, I'm not sure on the length of it, but I know the reaction is, for example, I know Trudeau, before he became Prime Minister, he very much criticized the previous government and other uses of prorogation. I think he even had a statement to the effect of he won't use prorogation to get out of his political difficulties. And now we're seeing what's happening here. I don't think the opposition is going to accept it or appreciate it. But again, as I said previously, it provides them with a chance to kind of change, or at least attempt to change the narrative, right? Because prorogation comes with a lot of other legislative impacts, such as ending committees, killing all bills going forward at the time. So I think ultimately what we're going to see happening is that they're going to prorogue, they're going to come back and try to set an agenda, have a budget, and kind of state what they want to do or what their progressive views are. Ultimately, you'll probably see the NDP kind of siding with them, but conservatives, and as the Bloc has said, they're not going to be supportive of this agenda moving forward. And I think when you see that happening, it's going to allow the Liberals to kind of position themselves as this is what we want to do as far as their progressive agenda. Conservatives are going to have their positioning when we have our new leader on Sunday as far as what we want to do, and contrast with the Liberals. I think that kind of sets you up for, if you will, a spring election. If that's going to happen, we'll have clear viewpoints on where we stand as far as conservatives on our issues, and then we'll have the Liberals as far as what they want to promise moving forward with their agenda.
I hear you ruling out the NDP. My guess is that the NDP would have a reaction to the prorogation if, in fact, it does happen and it's for a long time. Françoise, I'll get you to weigh in on how you anticipate politically the idea of prorogation might play out, especially if right now they kind of shut it all down. And that would include committees that are studying the controversy that preceded Minister Morneau's resignation.
I remember in 2008 when Stephen Harper brought that prorogation and the big hoopla it did on the Hill. I remember because I was a candidate for the NDP in the 2008 election. And I remember the manifestation on the Hill, the signs, everybody being there. That was the worst day. That was the worst thing in democracy, and so on and so forth. Many Liberals present. I mean, we never shared so much ideas than those days. And all this seems to be forgotten. One of your previous guests was saying they didn't pay a big political price, the Conservatives, for using that strategy because they got reelected. Mind you, I think it was a minority government, but still, they got reelected. As for the Liberals doing something that they despised before, I mean, they despised time allocations. I remember getting up on my feet constantly against the Conservatives saying time allocation on bill is anti-democratic, and my colleagues from the Liberals saying exactly the same thing. And who used it during this legislature and the previous one, mostly the previous one, was the Liberals. So, you know, that's one thing, sadly, I learned in politics, that there are some politicians who say things and then they do the contrary a few years later down the road if it serves their purpose. So I think they will really not be very happy with that. You'll see a lot of MPs coming out, either from the NDP, even the Bloc and the Conservative, to say it's anti-democratic to prorogue, especially now. And we would know if anybody seriously buys the idea that it is for resetting the agenda and that they have not yet started thinking about it with all the committees that government has on priorities and this and that. I mean, seriously, it would be to really make sure that the committee stops. Will they pay a price for it? I can bet you not. Why? Because parents are thinking back to school in September. So whatever, if they prorogue till October and they come back, if the committees wants to continue where they left off and so on and so forth. So it'll just make us having lots more to say on next shows, but I'm not so sure at that point in time that the public will listen. Sorry.
Of course they'll listen. You'll be talking on the show. I should say,
they listen to us for sure.
I should say that we don't know exactly what the Prime Minister will announce when it comes to prorogation. There are a couple of options. It could happen now and last until they decide to deliver the throne speech, or it could happen later on and last only a few days. So we are waiting to hear from the Prime Minister at about 3:30 Eastern, and I'm sure we'll get the details there, and there'll be a lot of questions about that. I'm going to take a quick break here on Power and Politics. The Power Panel will continue to stand by and weigh in as we await those remarks from the Prime Minister alongside the new Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, and the new Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Dominic LeBlanc. They'll be right there at that podium at 3:30. We're back here on an extended edition of Power and Politics in just a moment. Welcome back to special coverage of today's Cabinet Shuffle here on CBC News Network. I'm Vashi Capellas. I'm coming to you from Ottawa, our nation's capital. The Cabinet Shuffle took place just about an hour ago, and we are anticipating remarks from both new ministers. They take on new portfolios, Chrystia Freeland and Dominic LeBlanc, alongside the Prime Minister at about 3:30 Eastern. This all, of course, follows the resignation of Bill Morneau last evening. At 7 o'clock, he came out to reporters and announced that he was stepping away from the role of Finance Minister following a meeting with the Prime Minister. Bill Morneau says he told the Prime Minister at the start of that meeting that he would be resigning and that he will be looking at running for the position of Secretary General for the OECD. I want to play for you now, though, some reaction to both Bill Morneau's decision to resign and this cabinet shuffle from members of the opposition. First up, a clip from Pierre Poilievre. He's the Conservative Party's finance critic. Take a listen.
Now, the Prime Minister is weaving this malarkey about a policy difference. There is no policy difference. Both men have agreed in favor of higher taxes and monstrous deficits their entire time in office. There's been no policy difference until this recently invented one was designed to distract from the real reason Bill Morneau resigned. And that reason is this. Morneau will be found guilty for a third time of violating the Ethics Act. Trudeau didn't want such a scandalous story. The problem, the reason that Trudeau has to invent this phony line about a policy difference is because he knows that if he fires Morneau for breaking the Ethics Act a third time, for accepting free gifts from someone to whom he was giving government grants, then Trudeau himself would have to resign for exactly the same offenses. You see, if Trudeau publicly acknowledges that there's such a thing as 3 strikes, you're out, then he would have to apply the same 3 strikes rule to himself, which would bring an end to his scandalous and law-breaking career. And so we hear this fiction about policy differences, when we all know that it was scandal that brought Minister Morneau down. And in fact, we now have a government of corruption, cover-up, and chaos at a time of a deadly pandemic and the biggest economic collapse since the Great Depression.
That was Pierre Poilievre speaking earlier today here in Ottawa. He's the finance critic for the Conservatives. A couple of points to draw out from what he said. First of all, it's clear that the opposition, or the Conservatives in particular, plan to continue their criticism of the government around the We Charity controversy, that this will not move them from that position. And in fact, you heard Mr. Poilievre talk frequently there about associating the actions of Bill Morneau throughout that controversy with the Prime Minister. Mr. Poilievre, during that press conference, was also asked a number of times if this is something that the Conservatives would potentially this fall try and force an election over. He didn't offer a direct response, but certainly didn't say that that was in the works. The party actually chooses a new leader, or the new leader will be announced this Sunday, so likely that decision will be left up to him or her. But no shortage of criticism there for the government from the opposition. They still have yet to react to the news around prorogation, but we will probably be speaking to members of the opposition a little bit later in the show after we hear from the Prime Minister on that issue. We have another clip, though, from earlier today from the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, also reacting to the news of Bill Morneau's resignation. Let's take a listen to that.
I want to congratulate Ms. Freeland as being the first finance minister, female finance minister. That's a big achievement. But again, I want to focus on how we can get help to Canadians. And really what we've seen as a pattern of behavior with the Liberal government is they, when given the chance, end up helping themselves or their close friends, get caught up in scandals, and they waste that time that could be spent on helping Canadians, and Canadians end up paying the price. And that's really my focus. I also want to make it clear that the resignation of the finance minister changes nothing. It does not change. It doesn't change anything in terms of the way this Liberal government has been working. I don't buy their explanation that now the Prime Minister is going to be able to do what he wanted to do. He had 5 years, majority government. If he wanted to get something done, he could have got it done. He was at the cabinet table. The Deputy Prime Minister was at the cabinet table for all of these scandals. So this changes nothing. And to blame the Finance Minister for what is completely the responsibility of the Prime Minister is wrong. Our belief is that we need to have Parliament sitting so that we can get help to Canadians, so that we can make sure there's programs in place to help those that are wondering what's going to happen in the future. For families and Canadians that are worried about what the future is going to bring, they need to know that there is someone there fighting for them. While the Liberals are too busy fighting themselves or fighting for themselves, who's left fighting for Canadians? We take that role very seriously, and so we'll continue to do that, and we believe that Parliament is an important place for us to do that.
Bit of a different tone and tenor there from the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, but a somewhat similar thesis that as Pierre Poilievre presented around this controversy or the decision of Bill Morneau to resign, presenting the idea, Jagmeet Singh presented the idea, I should say, rather, that this doesn't change anything. They continue, both opposition parties continue to associate what happened with Bill Morneau with the Prime Minister, and as I said, they keep kind of reiterating the idea that this won't go away, this doesn't change anything just because the finance minister resigned. And on that point, I want to bring back the power panel to weigh in on all of this. Shakir Chambers, he's a senior consultant with Navigator. Françoise Boivin, of course, you know her well. She's a political commentator and former NDP MP. And Elliot Hughes, he's with Summa Strategies. He used to work with Bill Morneau, a former policy director at the Department of Finance. Thanks, guys. Good to see you again. I appreciate you sticking with us through this very extended edition of our show. Elliot, I'm going to start with you and what we just heard from the opposition and how you anticipate this perhaps ends up playing out, given the fact that we're looking at a potential prorogation, that this issue, this wee controversy issue, is still alive to a certain degree in committees. How do you see the politics of this playing out now that Bill Morneau is gone and Chrystia Freeland has stepped into the role?
Well, I suspect that prorogation will happen. Whether it happens today at 3:30 when the Prime Minister comes to the podium and answers some questions and makes a statement, or whether it happens in a few weeks' time, closer to what was the expected return of Parliament on September 21st, I think this will eventually happen one way or another. The government is looking and, frankly, needs a reset. They need to readjust what they're going to be doing for the coming months and years. COVID has, I think it's safe to say, thrown a wrench into the government's pre-COVID plans, to say the least, and everything is different. So the mandate letters, the cabinet ministers that you had in those portfolios, the plans for the future, everything has changed. We are at the beginning of this game. We need to, and the Prime Minister needs to put in the right people and the right players and cabinet ministers in the right roles for the strategy that he wants to take forward. He's done that today with appointing Minister Freeland to the role of finance minister. That's going to be the start. I wouldn't be surprised if there's potentially another move closer to in September, closer to the resumption of Parliament, where you get other cabinet ministers moving around. Because this is the Great Reset. COVID has changed everything, and therefore it makes sense for the government to reflect the changes that are taking place around the country to prepare for the road ahead.
As far as the politics goes, Shakir, though, do you anticipate, I mean, we listened there to what Pierre Poilievre said. It was not like there was any lessening or deflating of the criticism of the government around the We Charity controversy. Do you anticipate the Conservatives keep hammering it as much as they have? Is that a politically sound strategy from where you sit?
Absolutely. So I would say a few things. I think there's a lot of truth to what Pierre Poilievre said. This notion that there were policy differences between Prime Minister Trudeau and Minister of Finance Morneau over the last 5 years, I would challenge you to show me one or two articles that highlighted any of these differences over the last 5 years. I have never seen anything of that sort. So to say that that's a true argument, to me, it's a joke. And if it was actually true, we had an election 10 months ago. If they had all these differences in the first mandate for the Trudeau government, why reappoint Minister Morneau as the Minister of Finance? Why not get rid of him then? So I feel this is a bit of, we're trying to give you a false story to hide the true reason why Mr. Morneau is stepping down. And then for Mr. Morneau to say that I'm stepping down as a finance minister of a G7 economy to go and run for the chair of the OECD, I mean, that's not believable, right? So I think they're just putting all these stories front and center to try to distract your attention from the real reason. Because as Pierre Poilievre said, if Morneau is stepping down because of the We Charity, it also implicates Justin Trudeau in the same situation. And then you have to ask yourself, why doesn't he resign, right? So I think when you get these thousands of documents that are going to go to the We Committee, the problem that the Liberal government has had in the beginning from this is they allow this story to kind of drag on, new information trickling out as weeks pass by. I think as you give these documents to the committee, it's going to be the same thing with information trickling out very slowly. And who knows what's going to be revealed? Because if you would have told me 4 weeks ago that Mr. Morneau would be implicated in this, or would have been in a position where he didn't pay thousands of dollars on a trip paid by we, I would not have believed that, right? So here we are, and I think this is just going to drag out, and it's a good situation for the Conservatives to continue to hammer this home. They have one win as far as getting rid of Mr. Morneau. I think if you continue to push this forward, you continue to dig a little bit deeper, I think who knows what you're going to find next as far as what's happening between the Trudeau government and handing out this grant to the We Charity.
Françoise, what is your take on that? From a strategic point of view, I know that everyone can go back and forth on the merits of what happened with We Charity, and we've done that often on the show. I wonder, is there a risk to pursuing that strategy if there isn't more information that comes out, or is the reward potentially very great if there is in fact this trickle, as Shakir points to, this continuing trickle of information?
Well, I think there would be if the committees continues and different committees are reviewing all the situation. There's documents to come. There's more witnesses to come. That's why I suspect my instinct, and nobody will ever confirm what I think, but I suspect that's why they will prorogue, because that's how you shut down committees. And what I read a few minutes ago on Twitter from Montreal Gazette, they claim that it's going to be a prorogation till fall. So that's more than a couple of days just to reset and so on. It's really going to muzzle the opposition. So yes, they will probably, like I said earlier, really be mad about the thing. But to be mad when you're not sitting officially in committee, even if they make mock committee, nobody pays attention, doesn't have the same visibility. So I think the whole ordeal will be debated in a future election after they prorogue and they come back. They show a plan. If they have one, they better have one. What they want to do with the finance, we'll see what the situation in September with the back to school. Will it have an impact on a second wave? How will the country react to different provinces, the different plans, the opening, and so on and so forth? So it gives time to the government, who didn't have 1 minute to breathe during this summer. Nobody has. Anybody here around this panel breathe this summer? I mean, I've never seen a summer so crazy with different things happening here and there. So a prorogation, in a sense, even though democratically I'm totally against it, might be the breather that this government need, because it's not the stepping down of the Minister of Finance. Imagine on the biggest pandemic globally on the planet, you lose a Minister of Finance, you prorogue government, all things I never thought was even possible. You would have to ask me 2 years ago, and I'd say, nah, never in the middle of August. Mashi, what the hell are you talking about?
Elliot, on the same subject, look, if the Prime Minister gets up, and we've got that box on the corner of everyone's screen showing where he is expected to speak shortly with Chrystia Freeland and Dominic LeBlanc around 3:30 Eastern. If the Prime Minister does get up and say he's shutting everything down until the fall, proroguing until the fall, and I know I'm describing it in layman's terms. Obviously, there's a technicality to a technical aspect to all of it. But if that in fact happens, and the committees are shut down, my bet is, that further inflames or provides oxygen to what we already saw was a very amped up opposition.
Perhaps. I think the point has been made a couple of times on your program by various folks. For most Canadians, what they're worried about is the return to school. They're worried about their jobs, and businesses are worried about keeping open. Sure, there's a dark cloud maybe over this We scandal in Ottawa, but by and large, they're really worried about just making it through this pandemic and the impact that it's had. So while I can appreciate the opposition wanting to turn this into a major scandal, so far it doesn't appear that it's a major scandal in terms of anything nefarious. There were some bad mistakes made, poor decisions, certainly. Anything sort of illegal or anything like that, it doesn't appear to be that whatsoever. Well, there's more documents to come, but it doesn't appear that way so far. So, as the summer unfolds, people are getting concerned about the fall and the return to school. Those are the things that that they're worrying about, and those are the things that the government needs to talk about. They need to address and make people feel, as they did in the beginning of this pandemic, that they've got their back, that they're going to be there for them in next month and next year and in a couple of years with the programs they're putting into place. If they can focus on that politically, they'll be fine. Eventually, the election will come down to, did we do a good job, and do you want us to continue to doing the job going forward, or do you want to have, Pierre Poilievre as your finance minister, and whoever is going to be the next leader of the Liberal Party? That's going to be the question that voters are going to have to think about. So politically, whether there's prorogation or not, I think is less a concern to me. It's more about what are they going to be projecting and what's their plan going forward to show Canadians that they should continue to support the Liberal Party going forward.
Yeah, a couple of things on that, and I'll bring in Shakir. I think you're absolutely right that Canadians are concerned about the pandemic and their businesses and their kids and how all that is going to work out. And I think, they're going to be worried about the economy in the next election. They're going to be worried about a lot of things in the next election. I don't know if it's mutually exclusive. I don't know if they can't also care about the ethics of the government or the perceived ethics or whatever it ends up being. I take your point on, again, we've argued the merits of the issue many times on the show, and there are certainly various camps there. But clearly it wasn't a complete nothing burger because the finance minister resigned yesterday. So I feel like it will be a balancing act. I agree, prorogation. I don't know what the reaction among Canadians are going to be. Shakir, I know that they do have a lot on their plate that they're worried about. We'll have to see what the details are, I guess, when the Prime Minister steps up to that microphone in about 19 minutes.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think as far as the economic plan, I mean, the Conservatives and the opposition were calling for this quite a while ago. When the government released this economic update, we asked for what is your plan for economic recovery? What is your plan to get people back to work and get businesses thriving again? So this is not a situation where the opposition has just been absent as far as asking for those matters. I think just the one thing on the We charity issue, I think it's not a matter of just that in isolation. I think it's a matter of building this narrative, right? It's a narrative of multiple ethics scandals. It's a narrative of your finance minister stepping down because of a perceived conflict of interest. I think that's when people become interested, that the government continues to do these things. The government continues to think there's rules for the Trudeau Liberals and there's rules for ordinary citizens. And I think as long as you continue building that narrative, that's going to become problematic for the Liberal government, not just a matter of we itself.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and to Elliot's point as well. It's moved the needle, certainly, to a certain degree in this period. Whether that impacts or that narrative builds to the point where it impacts a voter's decision in the next election will depend on a lot of things. A, where the country is at in that election and when the election is held. The government has survived that narrative thus far, but that doesn't mean that can't change whenever the election is held. Françoise, your thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. And who is the opposition? Because you're as strong as your opponents. And one of the unknown factor right now is who the Conservatives are going to elect next weekend. That'll be an interesting factor, and how the Conservatives act after this, what type of offer the other political parties are going to put on the table on different issues after prorogation, when the government comes with a speech from the throne and lays down their program. If it's in the same ways as before, it will lack imagination in a day and age where we're living something absolutely horrific. And we have to shape up and come up with a lot of imaginative solutions for a world that will be different for the few years to come. So I'm looking forward to see these things. So those are all things that are not known. I do think that it resonated with Canadians, the We situation. I mean, I was at a board meeting today, and we were discussing giving a course on ethics to all of our employees, because we deal with health, we deal with families and death and things like that. So just to make sure, so we want to offer our employees a nice ethics course. And generally around the table as a joke, and I didn't make the joke, I swear to God. somebody said, hey, why don't we ask Justin Trudeau to give the course? So for me, I didn't react to the comment. Everybody laughed, but it told me, and that was not an unsympathetic crowd to the Prime Minister, to be quite frank. And to hear that type of comment, it tells me something. And those are the things we hear different places. Will this be enough? Again, I say it's more going to be about the opponents and what they put on the table. Andrew Scheer lost the election the last time. There was a page full of things to make this government fall. And to not win in those circumstances was absolutely incredible. So with what is on the table right now between the pandemic, the measures, the deficit, the we situation, and so on and so forth, what do the opposition have to offer? I still don't know.
Well, on that note, you've reminded me, a programming note, we will be covering the announcement of the new leader of the Conservative Party this Sunday here on CBC News, CBC News Network, as well as CBC News. So that's coming very shortly. Also coming very shortly, in about 15 minutes' time, we anticipate there on Parliament Hill. That's not the Prime Minister. That's someone setting up for the Prime Minister. He will be speaking to reporters alongside the new Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, and the new Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Dominic LeBlanc. Our power panel is standing by throughout the afternoon to react to what we hear from the Prime Ministers, as are reporters from this bureau, and they will join me on the other end of this quick commercial break. Back with more here on CBC News Network, special coverage of today's Cabinet Shuffle. Hi there, welcome back to an extended edition of Power and Politics, our special coverage of a cabinet shuffle here in Ottawa just this afternoon, not too long ago, just over an hour ago. In fact, we're standing by to take you live to Parliament Hill, a few blocks away from here, where we are expecting to hear from the Prime Minister alongside his new Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, and his new Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. So that manages the relationship between the feds and the provinces, and that is Dominic LeBlanc. He held that portfolio previously, took a bit of a break because he was fighting cancer. He looked great today, though. He's back, and he takes over the role or the portfolio from Chrystia Freeland because she does move over to finance and retains her position as Deputy Prime Minister. Here to discuss with me a bit of what we might expect from the Prime Minister and some of the questions that he might be fielding are my colleagues, David Cochrane, Chris Hall, and Rob Brusso. David, I'll start with you. What's the big question, do you think, for the Prime Minister today?
Well, I want to know the details of the prorogation that we assume he is going to announce. And all day I've been reaching out to sources in the Prime Minister's office and other levels of government saying, what's going on here? Is he shutting down Parliament right away? Will he stop the committees? What will this do to the document dump? Can't get an answer. they're all saying nobody wants to preempt the Prime Minister. They're saying that maybe some of our reaction to this is a little bit overblown, but it reminds me a little bit of like yesterday when nobody was being forthcoming because big news was coming. So I think the Prime Minister is going to have a bit of a surprise for us just based on this pattern of behavior, you know, the way things get locked down and not even a heads up or an idea of what is coming. It's just the Prime Minister has something to say and we want to leave it to him. So I think that's going to be very important because we saw that, you know, the Prime Minister is changing his cabinet. The opposition very clearly does not want him to change the conversation, and they really want to continue to press the we controversy forward. Like Bill Morneau is gone, but the Prime Minister is still there, so the problem, in their view, has not been solved. So how he handles this in terms of allowing for disclosure, allowing for witnesses, allowing for testimony and inquiry, the Ethics Commissioner will continue his work. That is unimpeded by anything that happens here today. But the ability of parliamentarians to dig for answers and ask questions could be, depending on how Justin Trudeau approaches prorogation today.
And that really speaks, Chris, to what the Power Panel was discussing. Does this, in fact, today signify a turn away from the controversy that the government found itself facing? Or does prorogation, in fact, provide oxygen to the opposition to keep criticizing the government for its actions during all of this?
Well, as we saw from Pierre Poilievre in the clip you just played, he never brings a scalpel where a sledgehammer will do. And I'm sure they're not going to lighten up in any way on the We scandal as being the focus of what is behind the decision that Bill Morneau and Justin Trudeau made yesterday. If you want to ask what I'm interested in hearing, I want to know what the Prime Minister and Bill Morneau discussed, okay? So when did this OECD idea come up that he wanted to run for that rather than being the finance minister of a G7 country? At what point did the Prime Minister realize that Bill Morneau didn't want to run again and that this was going to be a problem for him if he had to stay for longer than 2 or 3 years? Remember, we're 10 months into this mandate. There are still 3 years left, even though I understand it's a minority government. It just didn't have that ring of sincerity when we heard it yesterday. So what differences were there? And lastly, Vashi, you know, you don't see rumors and speculative stories in the financial media in particular that are leaked day after day after day unless someone in the Prime Minister's office has tacitly approved them or at least is aware that someone in the camp is going to be talking about a rift or about being off page on whether to spend on green programs or something else. So I want to know kind of what that dynamic was and how he reacted to what Bill Morneau had to say to him yesterday.
It would be good, Rob, to hear from the Prime Minister himself on what was reported over the last week and a half, whether this rift did exist and over what policies, because all we have heard from the Prime Minister so far was a statement last week expressing confidence in the Finance Minister and then a statement yesterday heralding all of Bill Morneau's accomplishments. So somehow that information got out there, and it'd be interesting, I think, to find out whether the Prime Minister will corroborate it.
I guarantee you, Vashi, that he will not be looking in the rearview
well,
mirror.
We don't even need to watch. It's okay.
He'll try to get us to look through the windshield. So if I were going to ask him a question or two, I would want to know how is he envisioning Canadians' lives are going to change as a result of what his government is planning. Are they going to bring in something for our elderly? Are they going to do something to help people with childcare? I would also ask him David's question, depending on what he says about prorogation. If it's an immediate prorogation, you will see the kind of mushroom cloud of we continue to billow out a little bit, and he will be accused of hypocrisy because he is on the record of condemning Stephen Harper for his hypocrisy on prorogation. But I'm reminded of an old saying. I don't know who the oldster was who came up with this saying. It may have been the old Rob Russo, who said that hypocrisy is just, what is it? It's the last refuge of some scoundrels, but it's a mere way station for some politicians trying to cling to power.
David, what do you think about that?
I think that looking forward, as the Prime Minister is going to want to do, I think putting Chrystia Freeland in finance is to prepare for this seismic reconstruction they want to do of a lot of things. And I think the conversation they're going to want to kickstart with a lot of this today is what kind of country do we want Canada to be? Because in many ways, COVID-19 has shown us that what we have is not it. We don't want seniors' homes that become, morgues. You know, we don't want an economy where women are completely vulnerable and don't have the childcare they need to be able to work. No, these are things that need to be fixed. We don't want to have, you know, the poorest and the newest Canadians to be the ones most exposed and vulnerable to the ravages of a pandemic. These are the sort of things that Chrystia Freeland is going to be asked to try to deal with in the financial plan that she eventually rolls out as finance minister. It's not just going to be, we're ramping up the infrastructure by this much and the debt to GDP is going here and here's our plan to balance the books. It's going to be a far more fundamental question and the conversation they want to have. But, you know, they have promised on this prorogation question in their election platform not to use procedural tricks to avoid transparency and accountability. If this whiffs of that today, they will be stepping in a mess of their own making, because the cabinet change is meant to be a direction change and a conversation change. If it becomes a conversation about a cover-up, then all of that gets blown away. I mean, this is a day of history with a woman getting the financial job for the first time in the history of the country. It could very much become a day of controversy depending on how the Prime Minister chooses to handle it.
And Chris, it does depend, of course, on the details of prorogation. But if it ends up being, as for example, some outlets are reporting, you know, right from now until October, that has got to provide some oxygen to, you know, to the opposition. Just given what David said, already the opposition is sending me tweets from Justin Trudeau 4 or 5, you know, years ago, talking about how undemocratic Stephen Harper's prorogation was. And yes, it depends on the way it's perceived, but they're already on it.
Well, let me bring it back to Rob's point. Yes, it may be the fodder for 2 or 3 days, and the Liberals will surely respond while the Conservatives did the same thing. The question then is, what are you telling Canadians about what this prorogation will mean for them? How will their lives be better? How will the government be able to address the kinds of issues that David was just raising? Everything that he said about childcare, about healthcare and long-term, those all require provincial government cooperation. That obviously plays into Chrystia Freeland's strength. She has been working with the premiers for the last 10 months and done so very effectively. So the framing is, of course the framing is going to be look ahead. Don't look at what's behind here. There's nothing to see behind the curtain. But the truth of the matter is he's going to have to be able to say what it is about this change today and about prorogation, whenever it comes, that is going to change the lives of those ordinary Canadians who felt the brunt of what happened over the last 4 months with the COVID-19 pandemic.
As far as the strategy goes, Rob, and I take all your points about what kind of information has to come out today, but if the goal is in fact, at least in part, to move away from all the kinds of questions Justin Trudeau has faced at every other media availability he's had over the last month, after the controversy dies down, if it does, and I don't know that it would, but if it does this actually help them in that respect?
To be determined. I cannot imagine that the opposition would let up. Look, the attack lines in many ways write themselves. Parliament has barely been sitting through the pandemic crisis. If he shuts down Parliament, what happens if there's another spike? What happens? Does he recall Parliament in a hurry? What happens in the event of some sort of cataclysmic emergency? God knows we've seen some of those this year as well. So he will face some very, very difficult questions if a Parliament that has not been functioning normally for 6 or 7 months now is in effect shut down for another month or two in the middle of a crisis. He is going to have some very, very pointed questions to answer. But I will tell you, I can imagine what they might say in riposte. It's purely political, not always logical, but political. Odds are that the next leader of the Conservative Party, if you believe polls, is going to be Peter MacKay. The last time that Parliament was prorogued under these kinds of circumstances, Peter MacKay was a minister in the cabinet that pushed for that prorogation. It was 2008, and he was the Minister of Defence.
Good point. I want to quickly, our producer Emily has just flagged for me that Pierre Poilievre tweeted, David, I'll get you in on this, 3 opposition parties jointly demand immediate release of 5,000 pages of scandal documents before Trudeau shutters Parliament, and this is a quote from the tweet, locks up the evidence. So the opposition already positioning itself on this issue of prorogation and firmly establishing they want all the stuff that was supposed to go to committee before committees are shut down.
Right, and I'm sure the issues management people in the Prime Minister's office have been looking at this particular issue as they've been figuring out what they were going to do and how do you accommodate that, because this is a potential, you know, stink bomb that could go off in the middle of this week, and you know, parliamentarians and Canadians who are interested in what exactly happened, and we either as exonerating documents There could be exculpatory stuff in there that the government wants to get out. What steps do they take? If they close Parliament, shut down committees, and those documents go away until October, November, that is going to be a problem. Pierre Poilievre, who is as subtle as a punch, in his we all saw him today calling this a government of elites and snobs, will have enormous ammunition to criticize them on this. Now, if they do find a way to release the documents, signal prorogation will come at a certain date in the future, allow the documents to be released, allow the committees to do their works. That is a compromise of sorts that they can sell maybe to the opposition. But I think it's like this is taken on the tone of a trial. And disclosure is very important in trial. So disclosing these documents in some form is important no matter what happens with Parliament right now.
I wonder, Chris, if in fact prorogation happens and they do release the documents, whether that does temper the opposition's fury. What do you expect?
Well, two things. If they do release the documents in advance of prorogation, there is now really nothing out there to be able to hold them to account. Parliament will be suspended, for example. There's no August 26th sitting, no more committee hearings, and it disappears into the ether of summer, the last few weeks of summer, and all the other things the government wants Canadians to focus on is the response to COVID-19. So I think politically, there is an advantage to releasing them now, no matter when you decide to prorogue Parliament and set forth this new agenda. So we'll see what happens, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if they come out sooner rather than later.
We are, if you're just joining us now, standing by any moment to take you to Parliament Hill. As soon as the Prime Minister steps up to the microphone, he'll be accompanied by the new Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, also the Deputy Prime Minister, and the new Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Dominic LeBlanc. They are going to deliver remarks to reporters, supposed to start any minute now, and then take questions from them as well for about 20 minutes, we're told. Rob, on the question of prorogation and specifically around this potential document dump, and I should explain to our viewers that these are documents that various witnesses throughout the testimony before various committees have agreed to provide. So communications between officials in the Prime Minister's office, for example, and those who work for We Charity, all in an attempt to find out whether there was some kind of nefarious action on the part of the government to try and secure this so-called contract or contribution agreement with We Charity, and whether it was above board or not, as the government and various bureaucrats have claimed. So there were supposed to be thousands of pages delivered to committee for committee to examine, and now it looks like the opposition is demanding that they get those documents prior to any sort of shutdown of committee.
That's right. And what are we going to be looking for? We are going to be looking for some sort of evidence to bolster the Prime Minister's suggestion that he put a pause on things. And despite his pause, public servants and political staff, despite the Prime Minister saying, "Whoa there, big fellas," they went ahead and kept going. They kept following through, and nobody that will look for some sort of evidence that anybody said something to the Prime Minister along the lines of, "Do you really think this is a good idea?" It's almost guaranteed to keep the issue alive. There will be something in there, I'm sure, for the politicians on the opposition side of the aisle to feast on, and there will be something in there. Perhaps there might be something, as David said, that's exculpatory, that may demonstrate that the Prime Minister did sort of put a pause on this. But I've yet to see anything that explains why, despite the Prime Minister saying no, people kept working on the project. I found that very unusual, and maybe there's something there along those lines.
As I mentioned, sorry, David, do you want to jump in?
No, I'm just curious to see what comes from Finance. Morneau is gone now. What does the paper trail from the Department of Finance show? He's the one with the big family connections to We, in addition to the Prime Minister. And the Finance Department was involved in this process early. Morneau is not there to take those questions and answer those questions after last night at 7 p.m. or whenever it was when we were here, and he announced that he was leaving, confirmed to the world that he was leaving. What kind of a paper trail did he leave behind on his way to the OECD, perhaps?
Well, the good news is you only have about 5,000 pages to look through to find the answer to that. Just to remind our viewers, we're standing by to take you to Parliament Hill, where the Prime Minister is scheduled any minute to deliver remarks. I want to fold in our power panelists and get their take on what they're anticipating from the Prime Minister. Shakir Chambers with Navigator, I'll start with you. What is your big question, if you could ask of the Prime Minister? What would it be?
Well, I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing what is actually going to happen with prorogation of Parliament. I mean, this is a big question here, and as I said earlier, it's almost hypocritical for Prime Minister Trudeau to use prorogation to kind of escape some of his political difficulties, given that he questioned former Prime Minister Harper over the same tactics. So really want to see what's happening here. And if there's anything announced as far as the financial or economic way forward, any of their ideas, or progressive ideas that they're touting in all of these articles, what are they actually going to put out there as far as their positioning moving forward?
Françoise, what's your big question for the Prime Minister?
I do hope it's not today, but if it was, let's say he announced some prorogation today that he intends to do so, I'd be in a sense a bit disappointed for one main point. Actually, it's removing some limelight from the finance minister, our first woman finance minister, and I would find it so sad that it would happen, because the whole conversation shifts to that concept of prorogation. And if I was a journalist, which I'm not, but I would keep hammering the questions on why now, what was the need, and does he know where he's going, because it doesn't look that way because of the timing, and we'll see.
Elliot, what are your thoughts on what you might expect to hear from the Prime Minister? My colleagues, Rob, Chris, and David, were talking about how we're going to need to hear, or Canadians are going to need to hear something today about what they can anticipate this new agenda to look like, or what the reason for a reset, be it extended or not, might be. Do you anticipate we'll hear more on that?
I do. I anticipate the Prime Minister will announce prorogation today. I think that now is the time to reset for the government. They started that again with the announcement of the Finance Minister. People are sort of forgetting here that we are in the midst of what is a once in 100-year event. I can't sort of overstate that. So, for a government to simply just go along as it normally would, all bets are off at the moment. We've got a deficit that is approaching $400 billion, if not tilting into $500 billion territory by the time the economic saver and budget in the fall is going to be announced. We've got, thousands of people dead in Canada. We've got an economy that's been, completely, turned upside down. We've got a high unemployment rate. So all the rules from before do not apply anymore. It makes sense for the Prime Minister to say, we need to reset the agenda. We're going to take time over the coming weeks. The work has already begun. We're going to take more time over the coming weeks. We're going to have a cabinet meeting in September. We're going to come back to Parliament in October with our plan, and we're going to put it to the government and to the opposition parties to see whether they agree with that plan or if they've got a better one to put forward. You'll have a new Conservative leader in by that point. And, it'll be up for the parties to decide whether they want to take that to Canadians. So, I think it really makes sense today for the Prime Minister to continue on with the big news, the resignation of the former Finance Minister Bill Morneau yesterday, the announcement of Canada's first female Finance Minister today, and saying, we're looking forward here. I think that's what he's going to do. I think it's the right move under the circumstances.
Elliot provides some good insight, David, into the kind of rationale that we can probably expect from the Prime Minister if and when he announces prorogation. My question, I guess, is whether or not, I think everyone agrees we're in the middle of something completely, I'll use that terrible term we keep using, unprecedented. Yeah. It is a big deal right now. I wonder if that's enough, though, to convince the opposition that this is okay to do. My guess is today, probably not.
Yeah, look, this is a very difficult, long, and strange year, and everyone is sort of found a rhythm now as the curve has largely been flattened around the country, and the imminent anxiety that we had in March and April has subsided a little bit. It's been replaced by the back-to-school anxiety that I can tell you me and a lot of other parents across the country are feeling. So there is an argument to be made that they need to make sure that they are ready to deal with this, and also how to get out of this. Because if you look at the mandate letters that all of the ministers have, if you look at the throne speech that was done last year, that's woefully out of date, right? Nobody had heard
different lifetime.
COVID-19 was not in the headlines at all. It was done at a time when we felt the biggest problem in Canada was Western alienation and a breakdown of federal-provincial relations largely along Liberal and Conservative lines. Since then, we've had a plane shut down in Iran, rail blockades caused by unrest with First Nations and Indigenous peoples, and a pandemic that has forced essentially the economy to put into a medically induced coma, and we're trying to gradually restart society in a safe way. So there is a need to come back with a coherent plan on how to do that. It has been done sort of piecemeal and urgently up to this point, right? It has been emergency room medicine. Now we need to focus on the physiotherapy, the rehabilitation, and the wellness plan for Canada going forward. And that's a big job that's going to require a lot of focus and a lot of energy and a lot of collaboration and cooperation between federal and provincial lines. But because of sort of the persistent questions about ethics and scandal, it's going to be difficult to do along partisan lines at the federal level. I think what you will see from this government going into the fall and going into Parliament is this more aggressively progressive agenda, as the Liberals define it, banking on a financially destitute New Democratic Party to like the progressive ideas they're going to put in the window to keep Parliament moving and to keep the agenda going. Because Mr. Blanchet has very clearly broken from them over this, saying the Prime Minister has to quit, Bill Morneau has to quit, so he's 1 for 3 because he also wants Katie Telford to go for him to keep trying to support the government. And I don't think either Erin O'Toole or Leslie Lewis or Derek Sloan or Peter MacKay is going to prop up a Justin Trudeau government under any circumstances.
Probably
so it's really
a safe bet.
I think it's really going to depend on them coming up with an agenda that appeals to Canadians, progressive Canadians in particular, and appeals to Jagmeet Singh.
It'll be interesting to see. Somebody was just telling me, is the Prime Minister coming? Was that? Oh, I'm so sorry. My apologies. I thought someone was telling me that the Prime Minister was about to come up to the microphone. He is not, alas. We are waiting. He is a bit late, as sometimes happens. It was scheduled to start at 3:30, but we will take you there as soon as it does. Chris, you wanted to jump in? I did have a question for you, so go for it.
Yeah, just very quickly, let me just buttress what David said. As they want to kickstart the economy, they also want to massage the NDP. That's who they need, progressive side of things, to be able to do a continued plan to try and get the economy to recover and focus on things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a very political element to proroguing now and coming back with a speech from the throne.
When just to follow up with you on that, Chris, this idea though that they come out with a more let's call it more progressive agenda. Do they need to put some window dressing out there today to signal to Canadians what that might be?
Yeah, I would expect them to say that we're going to need a new session. We're going to come with a speech from the throne, new mandate letters, for the ministers, because we understand that the world is completely different than it was back in the spring. And as we look ahead to that, what could it be? I think the greenhouse gas emissions, trying to meet the Paris Accord emission reduction targets, would be one that they could put forward. But remember, the Democrats want pharmacare. They want universal dental care. There are many things that they want that weren't priorities on the progressive agenda that Justin Trudeau outlined in the last election campaign. Do they have any room for that now when they've already spent as much as they have to try and keep people working and in their homes during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Rob, what's your take on the significance of the NDP and all of that?
Look, there are many ways like-minded, and there is mutual advantage. I am reminded of another wounded government plagued by scandal in 2003, 2004. That was the Paul Martin government that turned to Jack Layton and the NDP. Mr. Layton was able to get Mr. Martin to do some things, particularly on social housing, claim a significant win, a significant trophy for Mr. Layton. He was able to use that in a subsequent mandate for a great benefit to the NDP. Let's not forget that in 2011, they were surging because they looked at that moment, they were able to convince people that they were responsible, even though they were working with a scandal-plagued government, responsible enough to achieve something significant and deliver the goods. So there can be benefit to New Democrats to working with a government that is wounded.
Françoise, I heard you saying, I was there. You were there. Yeah.
Those are my
So was I.
And then 11. Yeah, I remember I was a Liberal in 2003, 2004, actually 2004, 2005, Paul Martin's government. And I remember when we struck a deal with the NDP at the time, how we were all told to be very nice to our NDP colleagues when we would do panels, not to be too aggressive.
Oh,
so
really?
we had to tone it down a bit. But yes, they played along. But at the same time, I will remind you that it's also the NDP with the Conservative and the Bloc who said after the Montgomery Commission, mind you, the NDP will not make a deal with the Liberal if they think it's a deal with the devil. If they can move the agenda, fine. But if at any given point, and I think that's why we've heard Charlie Angus, Jagmeet Singh, I've listened carefully to the words they use. Always say, let the ethic commissioner, let's go outside the partisan committees where we know where everybody stands. But when we'll have those two different offices, the RCMP, what will be their conclusion if they do anything or whatever, at some point in time, they keep their door a bit open that if it becomes absolutely unprincipled to support the Liberal, they can remove their support, like they did with Stephen Harper in 2011. I had hosts on different radio, TV shows saying to me as a candidate for the NDP, you will not make this government fall. I mean, you are not equipped to go into an election. And I said, don't ever dare the NDP on questions of principle, money in the coffers or whatever. It doesn't matter. We won so many seats in 2011 with barely anything in the chest for anybody. So you know what? I think it's going to be more principle for the NDP. But if they can get something, because they're a bit weak, they've been hurt in the last few elections, why not? So we'll see what comes with that. But they will not want to wear the excuse the expression, but some of the stink from the Liberal, and that they would play along.
You had Elliot. I could see there his reaction for most of what you were saying until the very end.
Too bad.
Elliot, your thoughts on the impact of the NDP potentially and how that might inform what we hear from the government moving forward if, in fact, their agenda becomes more progressive.
Yeah, a couple points. One, I hate to say it, but Jagmeet Singh is not Jack Layton, and so that was one big difference that the NDP had during that election, and he was able to, win over parts of Quebec. The other thing is, I think the Liberals and the NDP have, as has been mentioned, a lot of areas in which they agree on. I think two stick out for me, maybe three. One is childcare, even though it's a provincial provincial matter. I think there is going to be something from the Liberals on the childcare issue. It is too important not to have more women in the workforce right now who are, taking the brunt of this economic calamity that we're facing, and it's setting, the progress that women in the workforce have made back years and years and years. I saw a study, I think it's up to 30 years it's put them back. So that needs to be addressed to make sure that women are playing a full part in the economy. And also, that's going to help us, longer term get the economy going. And I think, senior care as well is another one that was raised earlier. I think those two issues are ones that the two parties can agree on. There's a lot of time to negotiate between now and a potential election or confidence votes on the back of a fall economic statement or, a fall budget, where those discussions are going to be had. The NDP, let's be honest, is not ready to go to an election. They have no money, and they're going to want to keep the government going for as long as possible, as long as they can show some wins and some victories out of the government on some key issues, potentially on childcare and senior care.
I just saw the Prime Minister's remarks being put on the podium, so we can anticipate him to step up to that podium very shortly, I think, and address reporters. Shakir, I want to get you in, though, before we head there, on the question of the NDP and the Liberals and where that leaves the Conservatives.
So I think when it comes to the Conservatives, I think there's this notion that they'll just say no to everything. I think it's a matter of the Conservatives will support good legislation. When Andrew Scheer was calling for Parliament to be reconvened throughout the pandemic, it was more to work with the Liberal government to improve legislation, whether it was the CERB, whether it was the wage subsidy. And I think there wasn't a willing partner on the Liberal side to work with the Conservatives to improve that legislation moving forward. So as we move forward, I don't think it's a notion where just because the Liberal government says this is the way things should go, that everyone should fall in line and say, yes, this is how it should go. It's a matter of we have Parliament for a reason. We have to hold the government to account. And I think as the Liberals put forward their priorities and their policy proposals, it's incumbent upon them to work with the opposition parties to ensure this is good legislation that reflects the views and the priorities of all Canadians, not just the Liberal Party and their preferences. So I think they'll find a willing partner in the NDP, but I think they're going to have to compromise a bit with the other parties, such as the Conservatives and the Bloc, to ensure we have good public policy moving forward.
That's an interesting question, David, and I'm not sure that that will necessarily have to be the case. If they do find a willing partner in the NDP, they don't actually need willing partners elsewhere. Maybe it's a different discussion whether they should or not, but from a logistics point of view or a political tactical point of view, they don't necessarily need another ally.
Well, but the biggest threat to them in the next election, let's face it, and no disrespect to the other parties, I already have the New Democrats saying, go easy on the destitute in terms of our finances, so my apologies to the New Democrats. The biggest threat to them is the Conservatives, right? Coming out of this renewal period, that is the party that is the threat to form government, to win the most seats. It got the most votes last time. They want that contrast very clearly there, that they are a progressive party to lead what they view as a progressive country, where 66% of the votes cast in the election last time went to parties that would define themselves as progressive on issues like social issues, climate, and income inequality and redistribution of wealth. That is the line they're trying to divide between themselves and the Conservatives. Now, in the early days of this, they relied on the Bloc Québécois in the early days of the majority of the minority parliament. Like right out of the gate on the throne speech, it was Mr. Blanchet said that he would support them on this. There was no reason to try to bring them down. But now Mr. Blanchet has clearly tried to remove himself from this. And
I'm
Mr.
going
Prime
to interrupt
Minister,
you
so
because there is the Prime Minister. Let's listen in live on Parliament Hill.
Dominic? Chrystia?
Bonjour à tous. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Yesterday, I accepted Bill Morneau's resignation as Minister of Finance. For almost 5 years, Bill has worked tirelessly on behalf of all Canadians to build a strong, resilient economy that works for everyone. I want to thank Bill for his outstanding service as Minister of Finance and as the Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre. No matter his next steps, I know he will continue to make important contributions to our country in the years to come. Earlier today, I was at Rideau Hall to make a few changes to our cabinet. Chrystia Freeland is now Canada's Minister of Finance and will remain Deputy Prime Minister. Dominic LeBlanc is the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and continues to serve as the President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada. Hier, j'ai accepté la démission de Bill Morneau à titre de ministre des Finances. Pendant près de 5 ans, Bill a travaillé sans relâche au nom de tous les Canadiens pour bâtir une économie forte et résiliente qui profite à tous. Je tiens à remercier Bill pour son service exceptionnel en tant que ministre des Finances, mais aussi en tant que député.
Also as a member of Parliament. Whatever the next steps in his life, I know he will continue to make a huge contribution to our country in the coming years. Earlier today, I was at Rideau Hall to make
au Conseil des ministres. Chrystia
Freeland is now the Minister of Finance for Canada. She also remains the Deputy Prime Minister. Dominic LeBlanc is the new Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and continues as President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada. In the coming weeks and months, their work will be more important than ever before because we are at a crossroads. Canada is at a crossroads like the rest of the world. Now, as economies are recovering, we see COVID-19 reappearing in places like Australia and New Zealand. It is their winter now. Ours is yet to come. So we must remain vigilant at home because we have worked too hard and made too many sacrifices to see things go backwards. And Canada has certainly not come out of this yet.
Right now, the world is at a crossroads. Canada is at a crossroads. As economies relaunch, we're seeing COVID-19 reappear in places like Australia and New Zealand. It's their winter right now, but ours is still ahead. We have to be vigilant because we've worked too hard and sacrificed too much to go backwards. The fight is still far from over. Just take the fact that some provinces are seeing new cases after weeks of declining numbers. For parents, especially, this is a big worry in terms of the school year. I hear that, and as a dad, I'm concerned about this too. Provincial leaders have a responsibility to make sure that our kids are safe in their classrooms. As federal government, we'll do whatever we can to help, including through our $19 billion Safe Restart Agreement. But of course, it's not just schools that are on people's minds. While many Canadians are back at work, the unemployment rate is still in double digits. It's tough for all Canadians, but we have to remember that it's those who are already struggling who are hardest hit. Women are facing impossible choices between kids and career. Racialized Canadians and Indigenous people are confronting extra barriers. Young people are dealing with unexpected burdens as they worry about their future. It will take time to make up the economic ground we've lost to this pandemic. It will take hard work to fix these gaps. Cette pandémie nous a appris d'importantes leçons.
Has taught us a lot. We have seen that there is still inequality and vulnerabilities within our society, and Canada is not alone. Right across the world, there is a consensus emerging on the fact that the time is now to be engaged in bold thinking. Advanced economies understand that with very low interest rates, costs of borrowing are also very low to stimulate the recovery. Governments such as Canada, which have a very solid fiscal position, have an obligation to invest to help Canadians and their citizens come through this crisis. Our G7 allies, whether it's Germany or Britain, like Europe, also are taking this time to act. We must do the same.
We have a choice to make. We can decide to move forward instead of returning to the status quo. We can choose to embrace bold new solutions to the challenges we face and refuse to be held back by old ways of thinking. As much as this pandemic is an unexpected challenge, it is also an unprecedented opportunity. This is our chance to build a more resilient Canada, a Canada that is healthier and safer, greener and more competitive, a Canada that is more welcoming and more fair. This is our moment to change the future for the better. We can't afford to miss it, because this window of opportunity won't be open for long. We've supported Canadians with a huge emergency response to make sure that everyone could cope during this time. We've carefully and successfully reopened many parts of the economy. And now, we also need to look to the future. We need long-term solutions that address the shortfalls in healthcare that meant soldiers were caring for seniors. We need good middle-class jobs that can withstand the challenges of tomorrow. We need to get through this pandemic in a way that gives everyone a real and fair chance at success, not just the wealthiest 1%. In other words, we need a long-term plan for recovery, a plan that addresses head-on the fundamental gaps this pandemic has unmasked. In the coming weeks, we will present our plan to rebuild a stronger, more resilient Canada. This will be our roadmap out of the pandemic towards a society that is fairer and more welcoming, towards communities that are better prepared for future crises, and towards a country where everyone is safer and healthier. As our first step to make this plan a reality, we will present a speech from the throne on Wednesday, September 23rd. This is the same week that the House of Commons was already scheduled to return. The throne speech will give us the opportunity to lay out in detail our approach going forward. It will also allow Parliament to hold a confidence vote on this new plan. Today, I have asked the Governor-General to prorogue Parliament, which must happen before any government can present a throne speech. We will be presenting a speech from the throne on Wednesday, September 23rd, the same week that the House of Commons was scheduled to return. This will give us an opportunity to lay out in detail our approach for the future. It will also allow Parliament to hold a confidence vote on that new plan. I have already asked the Governor-General to prorogue Parliament, which must take place before the government can present a speech from the throne. But I want to be clear. Whether you're counting on the CERB or EI while you look for work, or on the wage subsidy to keep employees on the job, these programs will not be affected by the prorogation. In fact, starting a new session of Parliament is about creating sustainable ways to support you moving forward. That has always been our #1 focus, and it always will be. Il y a 8 mois,
8 months ago, our government introduced a plan to address issues that count most for Canadians. That plan was designed for a different Canada, pre-COVID Canada. Since, our reality has changed, just as our approach has. Parliament must support a new agenda that responds to the new world we live in. Canadians expect us to work together at times such as this. We are prepared to do our part and receive the support of the Parliament for a more resilient Canada, a plan that will allow us to remain vigilant and to keep the virus under control, a plan that will invest in Canadians, a plan for a better future.
We have lots of work ahead of us in the weeks and months to come. And I know that the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister LeBlanc, who've taken on new roles today, are the people we need for the job, along with the rest of our extraordinary team of ministers and MPs. I'm looking forward to the challenges the coming months will bring. Merci beaucoup. Je suis content de prendre vos questions.
Thank you. I'd be happy to take your questions
Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions aujourd'hui avec les journalistes du foyer. We'll start the question period with journalists from the foyer. One question, one follow-up.
Hi, Prime Minister. Molly Thomas, CTV National News. Congratulations, ministers, on your appointments. Prime Minister, a week ago, you informed us that you had full confidence in the former finance minister. Your office said any statement to the contrary was false. A week later, he resigns in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Depression. What happened?
It has been a privilege and a pleasure to work alongside Bill Morneau these past 5 years as we've done incredibly big things for Canadians, helping with the Canada Child Benefit, reforming the Canada Pension Plan, and responding to the worst economic and health crisis this country has ever seen. We've been there to step up for Canadians, and Bill was extremely important in the response to the emergency situation. But now, as we look towards a recovery that will stretch through and beyond the next election, we need a team that is focused on the steps we are taking for now and for the coming years, and that's why I'm so excited about being able to work with Chrystia Freeland and Dominic LeBlanc and the extraordinary team that we have to stay focused on Canadians and what is needed for the next steps.
Prime Minister, when Bill Morneau asked or told you he was going to he wanted to resign, when Bill Morneau told you he was going to resign, did you ask him to stay?
I think through this pandemic, we have done many extraordinary things for Canadians, and every step of the way, Bill has been at my side, by my side, leading the economic challenges that we faced. Being there for Canadians. And as we look to this next phase of rebuilding the Canadian economy in the coming year and the coming years, we need a team that is focused on the future. It has been a privilege to work with Bill, and I wish him all the very best in the coming years. But I'm excited about the work that the team is going to have in front of us in the coming months and years.
Hi, Prime Minister. Sarah Sears, CBC. You were at Rideau Hall today. You spoke with the Governor-General. I want to ask you about your concerns about the way Rideau Hall is being run, and have you voiced any of those concerns to Madame Payette or her officials or your officials?
My conversation with the Governor-General today focused very much on this cabinet shuffle and the prorogation of Parliament, which are significant and important things. In regards to the concerning allegations that have been laid out, we have engaged a third-party process through the Privy Council office that I have complete confidence in.
And on a personal note, will you be sending your children back to school?
Like so many parents, that's something that we are in very active discussions on. We're looking at what the school's plans are. We're looking at class sizes. We're looking at how the kids are feeling about wearing masks. I know all my friends as parents are asking these same questions, and we're looking for answers. And of course, as a federal government, we will be there to support the provinces as they really make important decisions to ensure that all our kids have the opportunity to be safe as the school year starts up. But I know that lots of parents are going to be watching carefully what their local school and school board's plans are going to be. And there is a lot of reflection in a lot of households, including mine, as to what's going to happen when September rolls around.
Merci. On va maintenant prendre 2 questions au téléphone. Opératrice, c'est à vous.
Merci, thank you. Our first question is from Kate Bellingaro from Bloomberg. Please go ahead.
Hello, Prime Minister. I am wondering, now that you've nominated a new finance minister, how are you going to respond if she needs to stand up to you to make sure that the spending does not go over a certain budget for certain programs?
I think over the past 5 years, in working with the finance minister in some extremely important decisions, we've demonstrated as a government that fiscal responsibility happens at the same time as we invest in Canadians. We made a very different decision than Conservative governments in 2015 to invest in Canadians, to support families and the middle class through the Canada Child Benefit, to support and invest in our communities and in infrastructure. And what we've seen is tremendous growth over these past 5 years. Similarly, in this COVID crisis, we made a decision, we made a pledge to Canadians that we will be there to help people who are struggling through this crisis. And so many millions of Canadians are. We were there with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. We're there with the wage subsidy. We're there with programs to support small businesses, to support seniors, to support youth, to support students. These are the things that we will continue to be focused on. We believe in fiscal responsibility as a government, as Liberals, because we know that government needs to be responsible in building a better future. But we also know that we need to be there for Canadians. And as I did with Bill, I'm very much looking forward to working with Chrystia to make sure that that balance gets right and that we deliver for Canadians who need support right across the country.
Merci. Opératrice, prochaine question.
Merci, thank you. Our next question is from David Jungren from Reuters, Ottawa. Please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, Prime Minister. Minister Freeland has been very eloquent about the need to address increasing inequality in society, in part by making rich people pay more in taxes. To what extent do you expect to adopt that approach as finance?
These are conversations that I've been having with Chrystia over the past 6 or 7 years as she made the decision to step into politics and join the Liberal Party. And these conversations obviously continue and are more acute in a time of a pandemic when the most vulnerable are even more vulnerable, as unfortunately happens in times of crisis. Chrystia was part of the team in 2015 when we made the decision that the first thing we would do as a government was raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class. And that's exactly what we did. We will continue to look for ways to ensure that Canada is fairer and more just for everyone as we make the responsible decisions to get through this very difficult time by being there for each other in times of need, but also building a better future for all Canadians, recognizing the gaps highlighted in income disparities, but also in opportunities for so many Canadians for whom the same chances aren't there. COVID has exposed an awful lot of work we need to do as a country to build a better future. Things that we will do that we probably should have done even without having a pandemic, but now gives us the opportunity and the responsibility to do it urgently. And that's exactly what I look forward to working on with Chrystia, with Dominic, and with the entire extraordinary team of ministers we have in this government.
Following up?
So will taxes be going up then?
No. The last thing Canadians need is to see a raise in taxes right now. Millions of Canadians are out of work and looking for work. The economy is still nowhere near where we need it to be. We have work to do, and we are not going to be saddling Canadians with extra costs. We're going to be investing in the kinds of things that are going to grow our economy, and that's the kind of thinking that I look forward to laying out in the throne speech. And of course, there will be other parties that have a different perspective, that think we shouldn't be investing in Canadians right now, that think we shouldn't be there to help the most vulnerable. And I look forward to those debates. I think it's going to be an important time of choice for Canadians. But I know that as a government, we are going to remain focused on making sure that every single Canadian has a real and fair chance to succeed, even during this, and especially during this particularly difficult time.
Prime Minister, Ryan Tumblety, National Post. The Liberal Party platform in 2015 said it wouldn't use prorogation as a political tactic. There are several committees investigating you right now, and those efforts will be shut down as a result of your move today. How can you have said that in 2015 and do this now?
Stephen Harper and the Conservatives prorogued Parliament in order to shut it down and avoid a confidence vote. We are proroguing Parliament to bring it back on exactly the same week it was supposed to come back anyway, and force a confidence vote. We are taking a moment to recognize that the throne speech we delivered 8 months ago had no mention of COVID-19, had no conception of the reality we find ourselves in right now. We need to reset the approach of this government for a recovery, to build back better. And those are big, important decisions, and we need to present that to Parliament and gain the confidence of Parliament to move forward on this ambitious plan. The prorogation we are doing right now is about gaining or testing the confidence of the House, which is the opposite of what the Conservatives did that we rightly railed against back in 2015.
Prime Minister, yesterday Bill Morneau said he was resigning in part because he wouldn't be running again. He didn't want to be part of a future that he wouldn't be part of. Will you be on the ballot the next time there's an election?
Absolutely. There are a lot of challenges Canada is facing right now, and I'm actually excited about the opportunity and the responsibility. It's an incredibly difficult time for so many families who've lost loved ones, who are looking with anxiety into a future. And this is a moment where government can and must step up to be there for Canadians. We've been there to respond to the crisis that we've faced over these past months, but we need to be there to build a more ambitious, a more fair Canada that will take us through the coming years. And that work is what this team of ministers is so excited about, and so am I.
Prime Minister Trudeau, Mercedes Stevenson, Global News. You've said that you're proroguing Parliament as a chance to introduce a new, ambitious agenda for Canada, a vision that you'll put to a test in a confidence vote. If this isn't about shutting down the investigation into the WE scandal, would you allow committees to continue their work?
I will highlight that there was a number of documents that people were worried about not getting from the law clerk of the committees. I can say that we have released all those documents to the members of the committees so that they can spend their time going through those mountains of documents over the coming weeks, so that they can continue to ask any questions they like on this issue. I have addressed these issues. My staff has addressed these. Other ministers have addressed these issues. issues in committees. And when Parliament resumes in the fall, there will be ample opportunities to continue to ask whatever questions that committees or members want to continue to do. Right now, as a government, I think Canadians want us to be focused on the next steps of the recovery, on how we're going to build back our country better than before. And the work that we're doing over the coming weeks until Parliament returns at its regularly scheduled week is going to be really important and will be the entire focus of this government. Okay. Je pense que c'est important de souligner que nous avons été là pour répondre à toutes les questions que le comité des finances avait. Nous avons partagé les documents que les membres des comités voulaient avoir. Ça, on a fait ça il y a quelques minutes à peine.
We did that just a few moments ago before proroguing Parliament so that people could continue to look at that documentation and ask questions. As a government, Canadians expect us to focus on the big issues for the coming months, and that's exactly what we must do now. That means a speech from the throne that presents an ambitious plan for the future of our country. At the same time, when Parliament comes back in the same week that it was scheduled to return, people will be able to ask whatever question they wish about that or any other issue. Now, with our new Minister of Finance and our other ministers, we will be focused on how we will help Canadians get through this crisis and come out even stronger.
Sir, you've chosen Chrystia Freeland to be not only your Deputy Prime Minister, but also your Finance Minister. It's been a model used by previous governments. I'm curious to know why you decided to give this portfolio to Minister Freeland in particular, and does that say something about your confidence in the rest of your front-benching cabinet?
Chrystia Freeland and I have had conversations over the past almost decade now about how we need to create a fairer country for Canadians, how we need to grow the economy in ways that helps everyone. She wrote a book on the subject and has been a key player in my government since day one. As we look to building a better, more fair Canada that is prosperous and creating real opportunity for everyone, I can think of no one who is better suited to work alongside me and the rest of this amazing team as our finance minister to build that better future for Canadians. I am deeply, deeply grateful for her service and the service of all those who stand with me, and we will continue to focus on what Canadians need in the coming months and years.
Merci. On va maintenant retourner au téléphone. Opératrice, c'est à vous.
Merci. Thank you. Our next question, la prochaine question est de Émilie Bergeron de l'agence QMI. À vous la parole. Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau.
Good afternoon, Mr. Trudeau.
Vous dites que les documents
You
ont
say
été
that the documents
transmis au
have already
comité,
been
et
handed
donc
over
ils
to
vont
the
pouvoir
committee,
étudier
and therefore they'll be
tous
able
ces
to
documents contenus
review
dans
all
le
those
travail.
documents.
Mais avec une prorogation,
But with
ils ne
prorogation,
pourront pas siéger, les comités.
the committees
Donc,
cannot
quel
sit.
message que ça
So
envoie
what kind of
finalement,
message
cette décision
are you
que vous avez
sending
prise aujourd'hui,
to them
qui
with this
substance
decision
leurs travaux?
in terms of the work they were engaged in? Well, I think that during this COVID crisis, Canadians understand that we have to talk about the future of our country. We have to present an ambitious plan that will be debated in Parliament and that will be voted on in Parliament in order to address this crisis. Of course, opposition members will have every possible opportunity when Parliament returns in its regularly scheduled week to ask questions on whatever topic they desire. We've been completely open and transparent, and we will continue to be that way. But as a government, we must focus now on Canadians and on the challenges that we're confronted with when there may be a potential new second wave of the virus and the challenges that that means for Canadians. So we will continue to focus on that. A follow-up, Émilie?
Oui.
Yes.
Pensez-vous vraiment que c'est derrière
Do you
vous
really think
la
that
question,
the whole issue
l'affaire We Charity,
of the
il y a quand
We
même
Charity
des enquêtes du commissaire
problem
à
is
l'éthique
behind
qui se
you?
poursuivent. Ce n'est pas
The
affecté par la
ethics
prorogation
committee
du
work
Parlement.
is continuing,
Madame
and the
Freeland,
ethics commissioner will
elle
continue
était au
his work.
comité
That's not
COVID,
affected by
elle
the
présidait le
prorogation.
comité, qui a approuvé l'entente de
and
contribution. Donc cette question-là
There's also the question of the
pourrait revenir.
contribution
Est-ce que
agreement.
vous croyez vraiment que
All
c'est
these issues could come back. Do you think that's behind you now? No, absolutely not. There's no doubt that opposition members will continue to ask their questions. The journalists will continue to do their work. The ethics commissioner will continue to do his work. And that's what we have expected. That's a significant part of our democracy. But as a government, we will continue, as we did all throughout the summer with the agreement, the safe restart of the economy agreement, and helping people with their rent and to pay their groceries. In the same manner, we will be focused on Canadians, and in the remaining weeks before Parliament resumes, we will be focused on the plan that we will be introducing into Parliament. And our opposition members, because this is a minority Parliament, will have a chance to approve the plan that we introduce to relaunch our economy, fairer economy, or not approve it. That's the very heart of our democracy, and they will have every possible opportunity to do that important work.
Merci. La prochaine question est de Michel Lamarche de TVA. À vous la parole.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good afternoon, Mr. Trudeau.
Première chose, j'aimerais d'abord savoir, est-ce que vous avez forcé la démission de Bill Morneau?
Well, whether you forced the resignation of Bill Morneau or whether he abandoned you. Well, we arrived at an agreement, just as we have many times in the last 5 years that I was working with Bill. We arrived at the same conclusions at about the same time. In other words, that for the relaunch of the economy and in the next steps, he did not wish to run in the next election, and therefore it was better to have someone who could carry us through for the longer term. I was really privileged to be able to work with him over these last 5 years, and I wish him the best of success. And I'm very excited to be able to work with Chrystia as Minister of Finance and with the entire team as we shape an ambitious plan for the future of Canada. Follow up? Now, in recent weeks, the opposition parties have said they wanted to defeat the government. Do you want the government to be defeated as a result of your throne speech? No, absolutely not. I think Canadians expect the opposition parties to work together and that Parliament work together to address the real challenges facing Canadians, whether it is the problem for young people and students or seniors in Canada. There are many, many challenges facing us, and we have to address them as a country. And that's exactly what we will be doing in the throne speech. I think Canadians expect us to all work together to deliver on those ambitious plans, but it is a minority parliament, and the opposition parties will decide whether there's going to be an election in the fall or not. But as a government, we would prefer to be able to work to deliver concrete results for Canadians in this crisis.
Bonjour, l'inaudible la presse canadienne. Monsieur Trudeau, on se retrouve dans ce très étroit corridor. Je pense
we are in this
que
very
vous
narrow corridor here.
Vous avez échappé sur quelque chose d'évitable. Pendant cette gestion de la
Because
pandémie qui était très compliquée,
when you were managing the
là où ce que vous êtes
pandemic,
accroché, c'était quelque chose de très évitable,
there
We Charity. Alors pourquoi est-ce que
were a
vous
lot of
pensez
things
que
you
les
couldn't
Canadiens
avoid,
vont
but
avoir
with We
confiance en
Charity,
ce que
there
vous
were
allez
things you
leur
could have
proposer?
avoided. So,
Si
in
sur
terms
quelque
of
chose
what
d'aussi
you're
facile
going to suggest to Canadians, your plan, will this be something that will be easy not to ruin? Well, I think in terms of what we've delivered on in recent months, whether it's the CERB or help for food banks, or help for small businesses. The fact is we worked with a lot of different partners, whether it was the United Way or other organizations such as the Red Cross. And we were therefore be able to quickly develop tools to help millions of Canadians. And there's no doubt that we were bound to make mistakes. We did make mistakes, and we corrected them as we went along. But unfortunately, in this program, the student grant program, for students wishing to volunteer in their communities, there was an issue there that meant that the program could not go forward, and it raised a lot of questions. But we answered those questions, and at every step of the way, we were there to deliver on what Canadians needed. And that's exactly what we will continue to do. This fall, we will be facing other challenges, whether it's a second wave of COVID, whether it is a worse situation somewhere in the world. We will need a plan to help families and to help businesses and help the Canadian economy to reopen, knowing that our frontline workers and our healthcare workers need certain supports. So that requires a government that is focused on that, and since the beginning of this pandemic, that's precisely what we've been doing. So we will continue along those lines. You said that you want to rebuild the economy based on bold ideas. Now, I'd like perhaps to hear from you on what your ideas are in that regard, and perhaps Ms. Freeland as well. Well, we know that our world is changing. It was already changing even before the COVID-19 crisis. The major crisis that we were facing a year ago or 3 years ago was the crisis of climate change, and we must address that, not just for the environment, but for our economy, for jobs, and for the welfare of Canadians and all Canadians. So this remains a crisis that we have to address. But in addition to that, we are dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, an immediate and extremely difficult crisis, and we will have to address that as well. So there are many, many challenges confronting us, but at the same time, I know that Canadians are ready to be part of that change, to look for a better world, to participate in a greener economy, and to ensure we can make that a green shift to a safer, a better world. And of course, there are people who are working in very difficult conditions in our long-term care homes and so forth. There again, we will have to work with the provinces and with other international partners on major trade issues. So we have a lot on our plate, and we know that the economic recovery means boldly reimagining what Canada can be. And that has to take place. The environmental side, the fairness side, strong growth for everyone. And that's exactly what we will be focusing on. And on that note, I'd like to turn it over to the new Minister of Finance.
I'm sorry. I'm going to allow her to answer the questions, and then I will come back for more questions. How's that?
Yeah, please don't worry. The Prime Minister will be back to take more questions. Merci pour la question, Lina.
Thank you for that question, Lina.
Parce que c'est ma première question,
because this is my first question, I'd like to begin by saying that it was a tremendous pleasure for me to be able to work with Bill Morneau. He was a fantastic colleague, an excellent Minister of Finance, and we did many things together, including the negotiations on the new NAFTA and including tariffs and our work to avoid those Section 232 tariffs, and of course the recovery with the provinces. And as far as I'm concerned, it was always a pleasure to cooperate closely with Bill, who did an excellent job as Minister of Finance. And I would also like to thank Nancy and Bill's entire family. Political life can be difficult for our families. And I really want to say to Nancy and to Bill's children that I'm conscious of the contribution that they made as well. Now, in terms of Lina's question now, this is only the third hour that since I became finance minister, so I don't intend to provide a long explanation of my philosophy or our philosophy or economic approach. But of course, as the Prime Minister has already said, A green recovery is extremely important. As the Prime Minister said, Canada today is facing many major challenges at the same time, along with the COVID challenge, which is still with us. And we, our government, must now work towards helping Canadians and supporting Canadians as we fight the coronavirus, and also ensure that there can be a strong economic recovery, a robust one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So since this is my first question, I'd like to start by saying how much I have been grateful to work with Bill Morneau, and what a wonderful finance minister he has been for Canada. I worked very closely with Bill on issues like the NAFTA negotiation, like the 232 tariffs, most recently on the safe restart that we negotiated with the provinces. And Bill truly has been a terrific colleague, and I'd like to recognize that and thank him for that. And I would also like to take a moment to thank Nancy and Bill's family. Political life can be hard for our families, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize their contribution. To Lena's question about decarbonization as part of our economic plan going forward, of course, it has to be part of it. I think all Canadians understand that the restart of our economy needs to be green. It also needs to be equitable. It needs to be inclusive. And we need to focus very much on jobs and growth. As the Prime Minister said in his remarks, and this is really important, the coronavirus is still with us. This is a once-in-a-lifetime challenge for our whole country. And our commitment as a government is to do whatever it takes to support Canadians as we get through that challenge, and as we get through it, to really build back better and to turn this tremendous challenge into a fabulous opportunity for our country. Canadians have done such a terrific job in fighting the coronavirus so far. I'm really, really proud of our country, and I am absolutely confident that working together, we can get through this, and we can build back a country even better than the one we had before the pandemic hit us. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question in the foyer here.
Prime Minister Stephanie Levitz from the Canadian Press. In putting forward a speech from the throne in the fall, it seems then like you're daring the opposition to bring down the government and to force an election. Do you want an election?
No, we do not want an election. But it is obvious that the throne speech we gave 8 months ago is no longer relevant for the reality that Canadians are living and that our government is facing. There are many things we committed to Canadians in that throne speech that we will be continuing to work on, but many others that aren't the priority that they once were. I think it is important that Canadians have a clear idea of the plan that we have for building a stronger economy that is more inclusive, that is greener, that is fairer for all Canadians, and that is what we're going to be focusing on in the coming weeks as we return with the throne speech. But we need a mandate from this Parliament to move forward on implementing these ambitious ideals, and it's important that we have an opportunity to debate it. So I'm looking forward to the throne speech and the debate that will follow and the vote where Canadians and through their parliamentarians will be facing a choice on the kind of response that we need to take to this coronavirus crisis. Do we try to get back to the status quo as quickly as possible, or do we realize that this crisis has exposed flaws and weaknesses in our country that we need to fix, that we need to take this opportunity to fix. That's what we will be laying out in our ambitious vision for this country in the throne speech, and I think it's important that Parliament gets a chance to weigh in on it. But I am confident that, as Canadians expect, we're going to be able to work together to deliver on the kind of present and future that Canadians have worked so hard for. Non, je ne veux pas d'élection.
No, I don't want an election. I want to be able to deliver concrete assistance to Canadians, the assistance they so dearly need. But the throne speech that we brought in 8 months ago is not aligned with today's reality. So I think it's perfectly normal that we should present a new vision with respect to the work this government will be doing to build a better Canada for all Canadians now and in the future. And Parliament will have an opportunity to provide its comments on that. And since it's a minority parliament, they will be able to vote non-confidence or vote confidence in that plan. And I do hope that members of Parliament will understand that what Canadians want now and what all levels of government want is that we work together in order to address this historic crisis. There will be differences of opinion, there will be robust debate, but I think that we can be there for Canadians if we work together.
Good morning, afternoon. Tonda McCharles, Toronto Star. Minister Freeland, can I ask you a question? Given that you're the first female finance minister in Canadian history, I'd like you to address that. May I ask her, Prime Minister?
Of course.
Given that you're the first female finance minister in Canadian history, I'd like you to reflect on that. And also, if you could tell us one or two key moments or major points when you told the Prime Minister no to something he wanted.
Well, thank you for the question. And I am conscious of the fact that I am Canada's first woman finance minister. It's about time that we broke that glass ceiling. And I'd like to say to all the Canadian women across our amazing country who are out there breaking glass ceilings, keep going. We are 100% with you. One of the hallmarks of our government has been an explicitly and proudly feminist agenda that has always been a part of our work. I have taken particular pride in, and I'm very glad that that work is continuing. I think we also know that today this particular economic challenge our country is facing, the economic challenge created by the coronavirus, is hitting women particularly hard. It's hitting mothers particularly hard. We are seeing women's participation in the workforce fall very sharply. And certainly, I'm glad that I'll have an opportunity to bring my experience as a woman, as a mother, to this really important challenge our country is facing. Now, in terms of the times that the Prime Minister and I have disagreed, it's actually something we talked about yesterday. And we reflected, I think with good humor, on a few of the issues where we have disagreed. I'm actually not going to catalog those because for me, always to be an effective minister, my motto has been to have open, candid conversations with the Prime Minister in private, but also to have a united front when we come out in public. And I'd like to thank the Prime Minister, who has treated me that way too. That's a really, really important part of any working relationship, particularly in government. But I will say this, as the Prime Minister and I yesterday reflected on some of the issues where we've had a different point of view, I think both of us did feel, and it will be up to the Prime Minister to confirm this or not, but I think both of us felt that having those different points of view and having an ability to have an open, respectful, candid conversation about those different points of view actually collectively brought our government to a better decision. Thank you.
Merci, c'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Okay, that brings to an end a press conference on Parliament Hill. You saw there the Prime Minister alongside his new Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, and his new Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Dominic LeBlanc. I'm Vashi Kapelos, and I'm coming to you from Ottawa. I'm standing by with my colleagues David Cochran and Rob Russo. We have been listening to what the Prime Minister talked about, as well as Minister Freeland. A couple of, I thought, significant pieces of news to parse out for viewers. First of all, Rob, Parliament will be prorogued. Things will be shut down, but they'll be coming back on September 23rd, at which point the Prime Minister says he's going to present an ambitious vision for economic recovery. Minister Freeland says it will be a green economic recovery, but beyond that, not a huge amount of detail about what that vision might entail, just that it will be, according to the Prime Minister, ambitious.
Yeah, I was reminded, I'm sure as many in the audience were, of that very, very bad 70s movie, The Gumball Rally, where the Ferrari driver comes along into the race, takes a look at his new car, goes into the car, rips out the rearview mirror and says, "What's behind me is not important." And I think that's what the Prime Minister was trying to say. Look, to govern is to choose. To be Prime Minister is to choose the date of prorogation. I'm old enough to remember one-day prorogations, 2 days prorogations. 1991, Brian Mulroney prorogued for 1 day, brought in a speech from the throne. The Prime Minister chose to prorogue in about a month or 6 weeks' time. He could have waited to prorogue the day before the 23rd, the 22nd. It's hard to conclude that he didn't make that choice in order to shut down what is a rather squalid investigation into the handling of the WE scandal. So very much fixed on the future. The future doesn't include, for now, the squalor of the WE scandal. And by the way, Peter MacKay, Aaron O'Toole, Leslyn Lewis, Mr. Sloan, whoever becomes leader, one of your first orders of business in Parliament is to decide whether or not you're going to trigger an election call in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, I thought, David, that was very interesting. A couple of things. First of all, the Prime Minister was pretty unequivocal as setting this up when he comes back and when the government comes back as a confidence vote. And then obviously there's going to be a throne speech, but that this is about presenting a vision and then Parliament deciding if they're on board or not. And then also that he doesn't want an election. That was one of the one of the few, I would say, very direct answers that the Prime Minister gave. He was asked, do you want to force an election with that vote? And he said, no, we don't want an election. Yeah, his line was that he doesn't need a mandate from the people, he needs a mandate from Parliament. And that's sort of the situation. On Rob's point, they may have ripped out the rearview mirror, but there's still a lot of stuff in the trunk, including those 5,000 pages of documents that were going to go to the WE investigations of the Finance Committee. Pierre Poilievre saying on Twitter, those will be released. I think the Prime Minister said that in his remarks as well. Correct. So we are getting that. What I thought was interesting as we look ahead, so we will continue to unfold. A 5,000-page document dump, MPs will be all over that, journalists will be all over that. The questions will continue even if they're not in Parliament or at committee. So that process will continue to unfold while the Ethics Commissioner does their work. But if you listen to Chrystia Freeland and you listen to the Prime Minister talk about what we're coming back to on September 23rd, he says he doesn't want an election, but it feels like the election will start with that throne speech because he's talking about the need for very progressive changes, that this will be a blueprint and a roadmap for a post-COVID Canada that's immediately going to go to a confidence vote that will determine whether a government that has just lost a senior minister will be able to hold on to power or possibly face an election. And if you listen to what Chrystia Freeland said, reflecting on the fact that she is the first woman to hold this job at the federal level in the history of Canada, she thinks her experience as a woman and as a mother will inform how she approaches this. And she talks about the need for the reopening of the economy, the restart of the economy to be green, equitable,
and inclusive. So there are soaring ambitions in those words and soaring rhetoric in a time of soaring deficits, but rock bottom interest rates that they seem intent to capitalize on to make massive investments. We know the deficit is $353 billion. Some of that starts to go away, right, as the wage subsidy reduces, as the CERB folds into employment insurance. That will free up a little bit of fiscal room for stimulus and transformation. That's what they're doubling down on. That's what they're going to put to Parliament on the 23rd of September, and that's what they're going to ride into the next election, whenever that may be.
Before, if I may,
you may. Yes,
very,
and I have
very
a quick,
quickly.
Yeah, and
very
then
quickly. I want to say, he who successfully sets the ballot box question often wins. What we saw today was the beginning of the setting of the ballot box question. You want this? Or do you want, we don't want it to be about we want it to be about the future. And that future is going to be a clash of visions between us, the Liberals. Yes, we're going to spend some more money, but we're going to change the nature of Canadian society to help women, to help our elderly, or whatever it is that the Conservatives are going to put in the window. They've put their version of the ballot box question forward. I suspect that the Conservatives and the other parties are going to put a very different version of that ballot box question forward.
Yeah, you almost heard a change in tone in the Prime Minister when he started talking about the differences. You know, this is what you're going to get, a choice between the two. We want to help. They don't. That choice is going to be very clear to Canadians moving forward. I had deja vu when he was saying that because it sounded exactly like the election campaign. It was a pre-pandemic message then, but it's a similar one delivered today. Before I let you both go, I do want to get you on Bill Morneau. I don't think we can leave without discussing the questions to the Prime Minister on Bill Morneau. David, the most interesting one I thought was obviously the Prime Minister very effusive in his affection for the former finance minister, lauding his accomplishments. But then he was asked by, I think it was our colleague at CTV, well, did you ask him to stay?
Yeah, Molly Thomas asked him that.
Yeah, and the answer was not a yes.
No, it wasn't. And you see there the channel changing attempt by the Prime Minister. He was very happy to talk about Bill Morneau's accomplishments and his track record, but not about the reasons and circumstances and the details surrounding his departure. He does not want that to be the story today. He wants it to be what is coming on September 23rd and what has happened today with Chrystia Freeland ascending to that role. Poor Dom LeBlanc just sat in the back and no one had a single question for him, although he's come back from fighting cancer and just got
I was going to say, he's going to be on the show a little bit later, so I'm going to have a lot of questions.
That'll make up for it. But yeah, he does not want to talk about Bill Morneau. If you really had a level of confidence in him that matches the statement his office released last week, you would have asked him to reconsider. Clearly, this government wanted to make a change in direction and a change in personnel, and all of that has now happened publicly in the last 24 hours.
Rob, quick final thought from you on what the Prime Minister said on Bill Morneau?
A total dodge and inelegant deflection. I was struck by the words, no matter what his next steps. Well, I thought we knew what his next steps were. It's going to be a vigorous campaign on behalf of Bill Morneau to get the job at the OECD. No matter what his next steps tells you that campaign might not be as vigorous and might not be as successful as Mr. Morneau thinks.
The OECD and those working hard to join it.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to leave it there. I'm sure we'll be checking in throughout the program this evening. Thanks so much, my colleagues Rob Russo and David Cochrane. I want to get some additional perspective. David mentioned Chrystia Freeland. She is the Deputy Prime Minister and has been now since the election, but she's also now the Finance Minister. One person who knows what it's like to occupy both those roles at the same time is John Manley. He joins us now. I think that you're somewhere in the province, are you not?
I'm in the beautiful township of Rideau Lakes.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you very much for making time, carving some time out of your day to join us, Mr. Manley. Pleasure as always to see you. Let me start off and ask you about the resignation of Bill Morneau. We were just talking about it with my colleagues, Rob and David. I know you were listening to the Prime Minister's comments. Were you surprised by Mr. Morneau's, I should say, resignation?
Well, surprised that it came to this at this point in time. You know, we're in the midst of a very difficult period in the Canadian and global economy. We don't really know when the end of this will be. We know roughly that we've got to get some control over the pandemic before the economy can recover. We've got sky-high deficits. All committed on the watch of this finance minister. It's a very odd time for him to bail.
Do you think it was about those policy differences as reported over the last week and a half, or something more?
Well, I can only believe. This has been reflected in a lot of the commentary, including that we just heard. One of the key jobs of the finance minister is to say no. And you say no to a lot of people, to caucus, to interest groups, to the opposition, but especially important, you have to say no to the Prime Minister from time to time. And given the circumstances, you have to believe that Mr. Morneau's no was not accepted, and that that's left him with no choice but to either go or go along. And I think he must have decided not to go along.
Let me ask you, Mr. Manley, based on your own experience, what that relationship between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister is like or can be like?
Well, it's vitally important. You've got to have the head of the government on side with your financial plan. I mean, the preparation of the budget, for example, takes many, many months of very hard work, consultation all around by the finance minister. But there isn't a budget until the magic words come out of the Prime Minister's mouth, we have a budget. Because you just can't be on different pages. And I was there, of course, I inherited the finance portfolio from Paul Martin, but even when they were really at odds, they were at odds over who should be Prime Minister. But when it came to the financial decisions, the fiscal framework, programming decisions, there wasn't a crack of light to be seen between the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. It's vitally important because otherwise your government is chaotic.
And what about when you assume the role of Deputy Prime Minister? You're in the unique position that you can offer us some perspective that few others could about what Chrystia Freeland is up against right now.
Oh, it's the best place to be because as Minister of Finance, you're being briefed and provided information by the Department of Finance. As Deputy Prime Minister, you're in the Privy Council office, and you're being briefed as well by the Privy Council office. And when it was me, both sides, in terms of the bureaucracy, were a little bit uncomfortable with that because they were never quite sure. Because there's always tension there. They're never quite sure which side you're going to land on. So it's a great advantage because you've got the challenge function from Privy Council office against finance all coming at you directly. You don't have to wonder where somebody else is going to come from. You know the Privy Council office briefs the Prime Minister. So it's a very desirable position. Now the challenges that I had, I also chaired all of the cabinet committees simultaneously and held on to a few other disconnected roles that were pretty tricky to unload, including responsibility for a number of Crown corporations. I think Ms. Freeland is not burdened with some of those things, so she can focus on the finance responsibility.
And what do you think of the selection of Ms. Freeland for those roles?
Well, I think she has emerged in the Trudeau government as being the strongest minister, the one who has an identity of her own. And partly that came through her performance around the NAFTA negotiation. Before that, on the CETA negotiation, the European Trade Agreement, which she almost single-handedly delivered to the Prime Minister. So I think she's shown strength. She's shown political savvy, maybe to a degree that Bill Morneau never was able to do. But she has not been in a largely economic portfolio, nor has she been known to be somebody that spoke on economic themes. So she's going to have to work hard. She's going to have to earn her chops on some of those other areas.
It's clear, and understandably so, that the economy will be at the forefront of whatever agenda ends up being presented when Parliament resumes towards the end of September. I want to ask you about what you might anticipate from that vision in a second, but first on the subject of prorogation, what do you think of that move? We have the opposition standing by. I'm sure they're not going to be thrilled with the idea of shutting everything down. What do you think about it?
You know what, the opposition, of course, this is a target, and they remember well how it actually became something Canadians talked about when Stephen Harper used it back in during the last major global economic crisis. But, you know, Vashi, you and I can talk about it, but outside the bubble in Ottawa, prorogation, is that something they do in baseball? I don't know. This is not going to be that salient to Canadians. I mean, if he suspended Parliament till 2021, that could be a problem. But coming back next month, Canadians are going to grasp the last vestiges of summer between now and then. They may clean their barbecues, but they're not going to be worrying about politics. They're going to worry about COVID and about what the next steps are, whether their kids can go back to school. They're not watching Parliament, I have to say.
We shall see. We'll get the take from the opposition in a moment. But I do want to ask you finally, before I let you go, Mr. Manley, about what you might anticipate from the government. They did provide some indications of what kind of an agenda, an economic agenda, we will see when Parliament resumes. They did say they'd put it to essentially a vote of confidence through the throne speech. Based on what you heard, what do you anticipate and what would you like to see in that agenda?
Well, I don't know that I put a lot of stock into just the words and phrases. I mean, they let's face it, when they go to Parliament, they have to maintain their government by appealing to the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. So this is an election campaign where you really need the center. This is a parliamentary situation where you need the support of parties that are more to the left. And so the rhetoric and even the speech from the throne will undoubtedly reflect that. The problem that they will face is that the basic rules of how your economy functions haven't changed. You need private investment, and you need to give confidence to investors that you are going to have a firm hand on the levers of fiscal policy, that you're not going to let things run out of control, that you're going to protect the currency, and they're going to have to understand what drives business decisions, which is not something that is instinctive to Ms. Freeland. It was to Bill Morneau, and he had confidence from broadly from the business community. She's going to have to earn that. And what the government says is one thing. What it does is it is going to have to satisfy the concerns of the investors and the business community, because otherwise you're never going to see the recovery that the governing party needs in order to be reelected when the time comes and when that center actually opens up to others.
Okay, I'll leave it there. I'm out of time, but thank you very much for your time. As always, Mr. Manley, pleasure to have you back on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye. Former
Deputy Prime Minister John Manley. If you're just joining us now, you're watching an extremely extended edition of Power and Politics. We've been covering following the resignation of Finance Minister Bill Morneau, a cabinet shuffle. Chrystia Freeland now assumes the duties of Mr. Morneau. She becomes Finance Minister in addition to Deputy Prime Minister. Dominic LeBlanc takes over the portfolio of intergovernmental affairs from Minister Freeland. I mentioned in my interview with Mr. Manley that we have opposition parties, members of the opposition parties standing by to react to what we heard from the Prime Minister just moments ago. John Brassard is the Conservatives' Deputy Whip. He's in Barrie, Ontario. And near Vancouver, Peter Julian is the NDP's House Leader and Finance Critic. Hi, gentlemen. Great to see you both.
Vassy, good to see you.
Mr. Brassard, I'm going to start with you on the subject of prorogation, especially. You heard me, I think, there talking to Mr. Manley about it. He contends, and other Liberals have said today on the program, that this is not something Canadians ultimately are going to care all that much about. What do you think?
Well, you know, of course, Mr. Manley and Liberals would say that, but there is a major challenge here, and that is that, you know, what the Prime Minister announced today, and it was quite a performance, he effectively has locked out members of Parliament, not just from the House of Commons, but from committees as well. And so this is a government that's mired in corruption, chaos, and a cover-up, and the cover-up is continuing. You know, if he had a chance, the Prime Minister today, to put the prorogation off at least a couple of days before Parliament is scheduled to resume. But he didn't do that. And so it begs the question, why not? And the answer to that is that on the drip, drip, drip of the WE scandal and other scandals that are happening to this government, he effectively has put a stop to that because the committees were doing great work getting to the bottom of not just the WE scandals, but other things as well. And they won't be able to do that now, Vasily. So why not hold off? If you wanted to have a speech from the throne, and you wanted to do it on the 23rd, he could have prorogued Parliament on the 21st if he chose to, but he didn't, and there was a specific reason for it.
So the Prime Minister's argument, Mr. Julian, to that, or his response to that, because he got some questions from reporters about it, was that they're coming back when the fall sitting was supposed to resume, and that they have provided all the documents, or they would be providing the documents that the committees were set to examine in advance of Parliament shutting down. So those will still be available. And then once Parliament resumes, those committees can resume as well. Your response to that?
Well, no doubt this is as bad as anything that Stephen Harper did, and it shows that the Liberal tendency is very similar to the way Mr. Harper governed and the Conservatives. But the worst part is the impact on regular Canadians. We have a CERB cliff that happens in 2 weeks' time, and we don't have any changes to employment insurance that would actually provide those supports. We have concerns around childcare. We have concerns around kids going back to school and not having the supports in place for families. People with disabilities, over 1 million of them, have received no supports at all. And what the government is signaling is that they are not going to do anything substantive for the next month or more. And that is the tragedy. Canadians who've been falling through the cracks, or Canadians that are coming to the end of their emergency benefit, now know that the government is not going to do anything substantive at all. And we should have been coming back to work and adopting legislation to put in place supports for those Canadians. And what Mr. Trudeau has done is simply cast that aside. Of course, Canadians are concerned when they see their friends and family and neighbors suffering and not having the wherewithal to put food on the table and keep a roof over their head. And what Mr. Trudeau has done is simply said, hey, there's not going to be any supports for the next month and a half, so you're just going to have to suck it up.
Let me just quickly follow up with you, because I take your point. I didn't hear him say there are going to be no supports. And I know that the government has already said, for example, we interviewed Minister Qualtrough a few weeks ago, who talked about the transition over to the EI system. The EI system is equipped to handle about 4 million applicants, let's just say. Is there not that kind of a system in place? I mean, does this really mean, or do you know for sure that people who are on CERB who might need it or might need to transition won't have anything?
What the government is saying is they're not going to bring in legislative changes that would actually substantially change and reestablish an employment insurance safety net. So they can tinker with it with regulations. But what the government's done, what Mr. Trudeau has done, is simply announced to the country that they're not going to do anything substantive in the midst of the worst pandemic we've faced in over a century. And that is the tragedy here. Canadians being cast aside because of the turmoil that Mr. Trudeau's government is going through.
Mr. Brassard,
the other thing too.
Yeah, you go for it. Yeah, no, you go ahead, sir. I'll go right.
I was just going to say the other aspect of this is that we are in a time that is certainly unprecedented, but is unknown. So by effectively shutting down Parliament for the next month, what if an emergency situation happens where we need Parliament to act quickly? And what the Prime Minister did today was effectively shut it down. We've also heard, as Peter said, that the Minister was saying that there was going to be a transition from CERB to EI. Well, we don't know the details of that at this point, whether that requires any legislation as well. So there's a lot of problems with what the Prime Minister did today, not the least of which is to cover up the scandal that he's in right now.
Respectfully, Mr. Brassard, you heard Mr. Julian bring up when under the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government, Parliament was prorogued. The accusation then was, shutting down or preventing or trying to avoid a confidence vote. Is your party really in a position to be able to criticize this one for doing something similar?
But that's the issue, Vashti, is that it didn't avoid a confidence vote. It put it off for 6 weeks. And so, the Harper government at the time, which I wasn't part of, did not avoid a confidence vote. The Prime Minister will not avoid a confidence vote in this one as well. What he is avoiding is the ability for parliamentarians to get to the bottom of the information of all of the scandals that he's mired on. Don't be fooled by, and it was an incredible performance by the Prime Minister today, don't be fooled by the fact that this is about setting setting a new agenda and all. This is about covering his political butt. That's what this is all about, and that's what firing Bill Morneau was all about as well, Vash.
Yeah, respectfully, again, I'm not fooled by anything, to be fair, but I think it's a fair question to your party when, regardless of whether you ultimately avoided a confidence vote or not, it was a political calculation that was the accusation, to shut down Parliament, and that is exactly what you're accusing this government of doing. What's the difference?
Well, sure. We could argue whataboutism all the time, but this is a prime minister who in 2015 said that he was not going to use the tool of prorogation to avoid any conflict. He said it again in 2017 when he was questioned, and I believe he said it earlier this year. So this is a prime minister that says one thing and does another. In fact, we've seen a pattern of this happen over his tenure.
Mr. Julian, there's been a lot of conversation today and throughout the afternoon about the NDP's role in this so-called, as the Prime Minister described it, ambitious vision that his government will put forward, and whether or not they'll be leaning on your party's support to try and put forward a more progressive, so-called progressive agenda. I don't know the details of what will be in that. We heard some signals from Minister Freeland around, for example, a green economy, childcare, things like that. What kinds of things would the NDP need to see or hear in a speech from the throne in order to support this government?
Well, Jagmeet Singh has been very clear since the beginning, and so has the NDP caucus. We pushed for emergency benefits for everybody, including every person with a disability. We pressed for a wage subsidy that actually covered businesses adequately. We're pressing for childcare because that is going to be crucial for getting through this pandemic and coming out the other side. We've been pressing for a number of things, and we've been successful in forcing the Liberals, because of the minority parliament situation, into putting in place many, even though there's been gaps, of the NDP proposals. So we're going to continue to be pushing. Jagmeet Singh is going to continue to be pushing. There is no doubt that it is much more difficult when the government shuts down Parliament, as they have now for the next 5 weeks. And my concern, and our concern, is the many Canadians that are just going to fall off the cliff, literally, in the coming weeks because of the government's turmoil and its refusal to actually work with opposition parties to put in place a plan that makes sense for everybody.
Mr. Julian, the criticism of the NDP from others in maybe other opposition parties I've heard, or in the government, has been that while you say you pushed the government to adopt certain policies, that they did in the short term, let's take sick leave, for example, for a number of months, but they didn't go as far as the NDP had hoped that they would. And in response, the NDP basically compromised to the point where, Parliament didn't meet as many times or other things like that, and didn't actually end up getting what you thought you would. What would your response to that criticism be?
My response to those comments is, when you look at the difference that the 24 NDP MPs have made, it is demonstrable and constant over the course of the last few months. I would suggest no opposition party has had a better impact in actually putting in place many of the policies that help people. And as far as Parliament is concerned, we had a scheduled meeting next week because of the NDP. The Conservatives basically wanted to take the summer off. We said no, we want to continue to meet throughout the summer. And Mr. Trudeau, unfortunately, has ended that practice. We should have been having a question period next week, and that would have meant ministers having to respond to questions that Canadians are asking right across the country. So we'll continue to push. We have 24 members, but the weight that we have is beyond what our regular caucus membership would normally imply, and there is no doubt we've had an impact throughout this pandemic.
Mr. Brassard, I'll give you the final word. I'm guessing that you would disagree with your colleague's assessment of whether or not the Conservatives wanted to sit in Parliament over the summer. And I also just wanted to ask you before we go, Mr. Brassard, if you heard the Prime Minister today say that it'll be a vote of confidence. Is your party prepared to force an election?
Well, Vassie, to be fair, we'll have to see what the government is proposing in their throne speech. And it'll be up to the new leader. And I remind you, the leader's going to be selected on Sunday. But there's one thing that we will see, and Canadians can be guaranteed of this. We will see a big government, interventionist government, getting involved in every aspect of Canadians' lives. And I think Mr. Manley said it best. What I would like to see is confidence, not just in our economy from the private sector, but investment going forward. And that means, for the most part, a lot less regulation and legislation that this government has proposed over the course of the last 5 years. That's the key to economic recovery. The free market will be, and the power of Canadian business and the people that they employed and the productivity that's created will be the power to the economy that we need in order to propel us out of this economic crisis. That's what I'm going to be looking for personally, and I know I'm speaking to a lot of people that I represent who are going to be looking for that as well.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, both of you, for your time this evening. Appreciate it, as always. Thanks to the Conservatives' John Brassard and the NDP's Peter Julian. To recap for you, those are two members of opposition parties who are reacting to some big news out of Ottawa here